I was working part-time as an auto mechanic in my uncle's private garage, who rented out bays for car repairs to several mechanics. Now I'm 26 looking back, but at the time I was a broke 23-year-old student, doing weekend shifts there to pay expenses and gas money. The garage sat in an industrial strip on the edge of the city, surrounded by warehouses, fenced lots, and quiet little workshops out there alone. Inside there were 6 separate bays lined along a concrete corridor, all sharing one main entrance with a keypad code. Only regulars like me knew. Most weekends I'd roll in early, grab whatever open bay I could, work until my back ached, then drive home smelling like burnt oil everywhere. That particular week I wasn't scheduled, but I remembered I'd left my electric impact wrench there after replacing a customer's brake pads the previous Sunday. I needed it for a project at school, so on a hot summer Sunday around noon, I drove out there planning a quick grab-and-go stop. The lot was completely empty when I pulled in, which was normal for weekends. Nobody came out there unless a deadline was really killing them. I parked by the entrance, killed the engine, grabbed my keys, then walked up to the door and tapped the familiar numbers into the keypad. The lock clicked, and I stepped into the dim corridor. Concrete under my boots, numbered bay doors on both sides, everything quiet without compressors running. I passed 1, 2, then stopped in front of bay 3, the one I'd used last time, and wrapped my hand around the roll-up handle. The door was closed but loose, so I lifted it waist high, slipped through the gap, and found myself standing alone inside the familiar bay. It looked the same as always. 2 post lift in the middle, stained concrete floor, cluttered metal workbench, shelves stacked with parts, fluids, and forgotten junk. Above all that, heavy steel beams ran under the ceiling, and people used them as extra storage, tossing old tires and dusty boxes up there. I went straight to the workbench, set my phone down by the vise, and spotted my impact wrench case hidden behind a pile of rags. I flipped the latches open, checked the gun, and sockets were there, then snapped it shut again and picked the case up by its handle. That should have been it. But I remembered my uncle's rant about missing tools and felt itch to make sure everything I used was there. So I set the case back down, pulled drawers open, checked the ratchets and torque wrench, then scanned the pegboard, matching outlines to hanging tools. It felt pointless even while I was doing it, but I didn't want another lecture. So I kept counting and letting my eyes wander upward. When my gaze lifted past the top shelf toward the beams, everything in me just locked up. Like my body realized something was wrong before my mind. There was a man lying on his stomach along one beam, tucked between tires and boxes, his head turned so he could look straight down. For a moment I thought I was seeing things, but then my eyes met his, and my heart punched once so hard it almost hurt. I couldn't stare long, maybe 2 seconds, but that was enough to see he looked mid-30s or 40s, face smeared with grime, hair sticking damply. He wore filthy work pants and a dark jacket, maybe once blue, now stained and shiny like he'd been sleeping in it for days straight. His hands dangled a little over the edge of the beam, and I noticed pale lines and old cuts across his knuckles and fingers there. He didn't move or speak, didn't even blink that I could see. He just watched me, eyes fixed, like he was studying my reaction closely. Every instinct I had screamed to jerk back, shout, maybe run, but another part of my brain started counting distances and angles before I moved. I understood that if I let him see I'd spotted him, he could easily launch himself from that beam to the concrete 4 meters below. I forced my face to stay blank and my shoulders loose, like I was still only thinking about tools, and I dropped my eyes back to the bench. My hand slid over to the plastic case and I lifted it slowly, making a little show of checking the latches like I hadn't finished yet. I could feel his stare on the top of my head, but I pretended I'd seen nothing, even hummed a bit under my breath to sound normal. Then I turned my body casually toward the door, like this was just another boring Sunday errand, and walked with steady, slow steps across the bay. Every part of me wanted to sprint, but I kept the pace even, told myself over and over, don't rush, don't jerk your head, don't look up. When I reached the opening, I ducked under the half-rolled door without touching it, then carefully let it slide back down behind me until it thudded into place. Out in the corridor, I finally let myself breathe a little harder and picked up speed, walking fast but not quite running. Impact wrench case knocking against my leg. I didn't hear any metal clanging or doors rolling up behind me, which scared me more for some reason, like he might be moving soft on purpose. The whole hallway felt too long, but then I hit the main entrance, shoved the bar, and stepped out into the open lot. As soon as the door closed behind me, and I saw my car sitting there alone, the calm act just collapsed. I almost dropped the case trying to get my keys out, hands shaking so badly I could hardly hit the unlock button. I yanked the driver's door open, slid inside, and locked all the doors immediately. Then just sat there with my heart pounding and that guy's eyes stuck in my head. I grabbed my phone, thumb fumbling on the screen as I punched in 911 and pressed it to my ear. When the dispatcher answered, my voice came out thin and shaky. I told her my name, my uncle's business name, the address, and that there was some man hiding up near the ceiling inside one of the bays. I said I didn't know if he had a weapon, but he was watching me, and he wasn't supposed to be there, and I was honestly scared he might hurt someone. She kept me talking, asked if I was safe, told me to stay in the locked car and not go back inside for any reason until officers arrived. Those 7 or so minutes waiting felt stretched and jumpy. Every time the building door moved in my side vision, I flinched, expecting to see him step out. Finally, 2 patrol cars turned into the lot, and 3 officers got out, hands near their holsters, scanning the area. They came over to my window, and I rolled it down just enough to talk, then pointed toward Bay 3 while I went over everything again, this time a little more slowly. One of them asked, "You're sure he didn't see you see him?" And I told him I was almost certain, that I'd acted like I hadn't noticed. The oldest-looking officer nodded, said, "Good. Stay put." And they moved to the entrance. I watched them punch in the code and disappear into the building with their guns drawn and their flashlights already on. After that, I couldn't see much, just shadows moving behind the entrance glass and faint, muffled yelling inside that made my stomach twist. I kept staring at the door, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt, waiting for someone to come back out. A few minutes later, the door burst open, and 2 of the officers came out, half dragging a man in handcuffs between them. Even from the car, I recognized the same filthy clothes, same messy hair. But now he was fighting, twisting his shoulders, trying to rip his arms free. He was shouting the whole time, stuff like, "I didn't do anything," and random curses that didn't even connect, voice cracking. The 3rd officer followed behind them, holding a heavy adjustable wrench in his gloved hand, like evidence. When they walked the guy past the front of my car, he jerked his head toward me, eyes wide and unfocused, and yelled, "You set me up, man! You set me up!" before one cop shoved him forward into the back of a cruiser. A little later, after things calmed down, one of the officers came back to my window and explained who he was. Turned out he used to work for one of the other mechanics in the building, but had been fired a couple of months earlier for stealing tools and parts, and nobody had thought to change the door code. He'd memorized it, kept coming back on quiet days, apparently sleeping up on those beams and waiting until someone came in alone so he could scare them. Or worse, the cop held up the wrench and said they'd found it tucked under his chest where he'd been lying, gripped like a weapon. And he told me straight up that if I'd yelled or bolted or tried to confront him, there was a good chance the guy would have jumped down and gone after me with it. After the police left, my uncle showed up, pale and furious, talking about lawsuits and liability. and the very first thing we did was change every single lock code on the property and call a guy to install cameras in all the bays in the corridor. For months after that, every time I walked into a quiet garage or warehouse, I caught myself automatically looking up at the ceiling, checking beams and shelves, replaying those few seconds under that man watching me. And honestly, it took me a long time to calm down, because I understood I hadn't just found some harmless squatter that day. I'd walked away from a situation that could have turned into a very real attack in about one wrong move. During my first year at Mesa Community College, when I was 19 and studying programming, my parents said they'd pay for tuition, but I had to earn my own spending money. I thought that was reasonable. I still lived at home, had an old beater Corolla, and mostly needed cash for gas, food, and hanging out after class. I sent applications to pretty much every place within a few miles of campus that didn't require experience. Arby's on South Dobson Road was the first one that actually responded. I filled out the online form on a Monday. They called me on Wednesday, and by Friday, I was behind the counter in a red polo, black apron, and a hat that kept sliding down over my eyes. They started me at $9.50 an hour. The general manager, Terry, trained me that first week. She showed me how to log into the register, ring in combos without messing up, wrap sandwiches tight, and constantly refill sauces, napkins, and lids so we didn't get yelled at in the middle of a rush. My co-workers were two other students my age, Kyle and Jess, and two older women, Rachel and Denise, who seemed to live there. The schedule changed every week, but I tried to grab evening shifts after class, usually 6 to close at 10. For the first month, everything was boring in a good way. Orders, dishes, trash, wipe tables, go home smelling like fryer oil. I got comfortable enough on the register that Terry didn't hover anymore. Then, that Tuesday night in mid-March happened. It was around 8:30. We were past the dinner rush, not close enough to closing to start shutting things down. 3 customers were in the dining room, all sitting alone, half watching their food and half watching their phones. I was the only one on front counter. Kyle and Jess were in the back on drive-thru and sandwiches. Terry was shut in the tiny office counting cash. Rachel was mopping near the bathrooms. It was one of those weirdly quiet moments where you hear the timers beeping and the soda machine humming and you don't really think about any of it. The door chime went off and this man walked in. He looked mid-40s, average height, dark jeans, gray hoodie with the hood up, sunglasses on, even though the sky outside was basically black clean shave, neat haircut, nothing obviously off about him. If anything, he looked like some office guy on his way home. He stepped up to the counter, leaned his elbows on it like he'd been there before, and in this steady voice said, "I want a classic roast beef, large fries, and you're going to open that register and hand me all the bills." I actually let out a short laugh. We'd joked before about TikTok pranks, people fake robbing places for views, and for a second I thought that's what this was. I said something like, "Okay, sure. What drink with that?" expecting him to smile or hold up a phone. He didn't. His face didn't change at all. He just lifted the bottom edge of his hoodie a couple of inches with 2 fingers. There was a black handgun grip sticking out over his waistband. I didn't know anything about models or calibers. I just knew it wasn't plastic. The metal looked dull and used, not like a toy. My throat went tight. The 3 people eating behind him didn't react at all. They had no idea. He let the hoodie fall back into place and moved his other hand so it rested near the gun. "This isn't a joke," he said quietly. "Open the drawer. Put the cash in a paper bag, quick and quiet, and nobody gets hurt." His tone was so flat it barely sounded like a threat. My hands started to shake. I remember thinking that if I screamed and he panicked, he'd start shooting and the people in the dining room would catch it first. That thought alone was enough to keep me from doing anything dumb. I hit the no sale button and the register popped open with that normal click. It sounded ridiculously loud to me. I glanced toward the kitchen, waiting for someone to ask why I'd opened the drawer, but the beeping and talking back there just kept going. He reached over to the stack of empty food bags, grabbed one, unfolded it, and held it out toward me. I started pulling out bills, 20s first, then 10s and 5s, trying not to drop them even though my fingers felt numb. There was around 400 in there because Terry hadn't done the last pull yet. I could feel his eyes on my hands, could see his other hand resting on the gun under the fabric. "Leave the coins, just paper," he added, almost like a reminder. I left the quarters and ones. When I'd cleared out the bills, I folded the top of the bag once and held it out to him. He took it calmly, slid it into the front pocket of his hoodie, and smoothed it down like he was just putting away leftovers. For a second, I thought he'd turn and walk out the door, and that would be the end of it. But he didn't move. His elbows were still on the counter, like any other customer waiting on food. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like everyone in the place should hear it. I remember realizing that even though he already had the money, he still had a gun, and we were all still stuck in there with him until he decided he was done. He met my eyes, completely calm, and said, "Now make my order. Classic roast beef, large fries." I didn't know if he was joking or serious, but I started making the sandwich. My hands were shaking badly, the meat slid crooked, sauce spilling across the stainless counter. He didn't rush me, didn't say anything, just kept checking the kitchen doorway and windows. I wrapped the sandwich, dropped fries into the bag, added napkins automatically, slid it over. I mumbled something like, "Here you go," voice cracking, and he just nodded once calmly. He actually said thanks, totally normal tone, then turned toward the doors with the tray. I watched his hands, waiting for sudden movement, but he only pushed through and left. From the counter, I couldn't see any car waiting, just darkness over the larger lot. He walked toward the shopping center, disappeared around the side of our building, and vanished. I realized my fingers rested inside the empty drawer, like I was guarding invisible money. The register kept beeping at me to close it, that annoying sound finally snapping me. About a minute later, the office door opened and Terry stepped out holding deposit bag. She saw the open drawer first, then my face, and her whole expression tightened immediately. "What happened? Why is the register open?" she asked, already setting the bag on counter. I opened my mouth but nothing came out, so I pointed weakly toward the doors. She stepped closer, really looked at me, and quietly asked if somebody had robbed me. I managed a nod, throat burning, and that was all she needed to start moving. Terry grabbed the store phone, dialed 911, reported armed robbery, suspect on foot, no injuries. Then she yelled toward the kitchen, told everyone to lock the door and stay inside. The restaurant went from quiet to chaotic. Footsteps everywhere, people asking questions I couldn't process. I stayed behind the counter because my knees felt loose, like they might give out. The first patrol car arrived 10 minutes later, lights flashing across the empty dining room. 2 officers came inside, checked bathrooms and storage areas, making sure he hadn't hidden anywhere. One officer guided me to a table, sat across from me, and asked information slowly. He wanted my name, age, address, how long I'd worked there, all that routine stuff. Then he had me retell everything the guy did from walking in to leaving outside. My answers sounded distant to me, like someone else was talking through a speaker somewhere. A detective arrived while we were still talking. Guy in plain clothes, straightforward and focused. He took me and Terry into the office, pulled footage, and watched the robbery silently. On screen, we watched him enter, lean on the counter, show the gun, grab money. The hood and sunglasses hid of his face, his head tilted down the whole time. Afterward, corporate people called, decided to close the store 2 days for investigation and support. The following afternoon, Terry phoned me at home, voice tired, and said I was terminated. She explained it wasn't giving him money. Policy said cooperate, but for missing the alarm. There was a button under the register I was supposed to hit. I had forgotten I told her I understood, because honestly, I couldn't imagine standing behind that counter again. Police never called with updates, and my mom said detectives considered it one more case. By April, I had a new job at the library, shelving books and checking IDs. Work there was, and predictable. Nothing like fast food rushes, and my parents seemed relieved. Still, whenever someone in a gray hoodie steps up to counter, everything tightens inside me. The red streak on the Denny's window wasn't wing sauce, and I only realized that when the detective showed me the photos. But I'll start from the beginning. That night, I was in my usual corner booth with my laptop, finishing a feature before a Wednesday deadline. I work remote as a programmer, and my apartment gets so quiet it feels like pressure in my ears, so I end up in this Denny's on the edge of Tempe more than I should. The coffee is strong, outlets are easy to reach, and nobody gives me grief as long as I keep ordering something every couple of hours. It was around midnight. The only customers were 2 truckers at the counter, and an older couple half asleep in a booth. Roxana was on shift, the night server who already knew I wanted black coffee and wings without even asking. Out in the parking lot, I could see a gray Ford Explorer idling near the side of the building. Just inside the light from the one working pole, I first noticed it when I walked up to the register to ask for another order of fries. The headlights were on but dim, like the driver had half turned the knob. I thought somebody was waiting on a to-go order or picking someone up from the motel across the street. An hour later, the truckers paid and left. The couple shuffled out, and the Explorer was still parked in the exact same spot. Nobody had gotten in or out. I tried to lose myself in my code review, but every time my eyes needed a break, they went straight back to that SUV. It sat there like a frozen frame while everything else in the place kept moving. A little after 1, people started coming in through the front door for the morning shift. A cook with headphones around his neck, another server yawning into her elbow. Roxana rang herself out on the little screen by the register, grabbed her bag, and waved a quick goodbye at me. I raised my coffee cup back at her without really thinking. From my corner, I could see the whole side lot through the big glass, so when she pushed open the side door, I watched her cross the pavement toward her Toyota Camry under the pole light. As soon as she was outside, the door of the Explorer opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped out fast, like he'd been waiting for that exact second. He moved toward her from behind, not quite running, but close. I straightened up in the booth, one hand still on the trackpad. Roxana turned when he called to her. Even through the glass, I could see her recognize him. Her shoulders dropped a little, like whatever she'd been expecting to deal with was at least familiar. They stood near the front of her car, talking. It looked tense right away. His head was angled down toward her, his hands moving a lot. She crossed her arms, then shook her head. The new server behind the counter was tying her apron, oblivious. I slid my phone out of my pocket and kept it in my palm, not sure if I was being paranoid or smart. Outside, Roxana uncrossed her arms and jabbed a finger at him. He stepped in closer. When he grabbed her forearm, she jerked back hard enough that I heard my own chair leg scrape on the tile. My thumb missed the unlock pattern twice. By the time I got to the dial screen, he had shoved her against the hood of the Camry. Their bodies blocked most of my view, just shapes pressed together in the yellow light. I punched in 911 and held the phone to my ear. While it rang, he pinned her down with one arm and reached under his jacket with the other. Something thin and metallic caught the light as he brought his hand back up. I remember telling myself it could be keys, even as he raised his arm in that stiff, wrong angle that didn't look like anything normal. What happened next took maybe 4 seconds. His arm drove down into her side in 3 quick motions. Her legs kicked once, then went loose, and she slid down the front of the car onto the asphalt. He stayed over her for a beat, chest moving, then bent and did something I didn't understand until later. He wiped his hands on the front of her uniform shirt, like he didn't want to carry anything away with him. The dispatcher finally answered and started her script, asking for the nature of my emergency, while the man turned his back, got into the Explorer, and rolled out of the lot with his headlights still off. I watched him disappear toward the road while I stammered out the address and the words, "Woman stabbed in the parking lot," over and over until the dispatcher told me to stop and slow down. Inside, nothing moved for a few seconds. Then the new server looked toward the window, dropped her order pad, and ran for the side door. I could see her hit the pavement, skid on her knees next to Roxana, and start screaming. None of it made a sound where I sat. All I heard was the dispatcher telling me help was on the way and asking if the attacker was still there. My laptop screen had dimmed. When I tapped the touchpad, the editor snapped back with the cursor blinking in the same half-finished line of code, as if the last minute hadn't happened. Through the glass, the parking lot filled with flashing lights faster than I thought possible. Patrol cars, an ambulance, then someone stretching yellow tape across the entrance while officers pushed us all back into seats and told us not to leave. They questioned me right there in my booth. A uniform took my basic info first. Then a detective in a plain shirt sat down where my laptop had been and turned my coffee cup aside. He had a small notebook, but barely looked at it. He asked me to go through things in order. What time I got there. When I first noticed the Explorer. What Roxana said to me. What I saw outside. We went over the man's height, his build, his jacket, the make of the SUV, the way it pulled out of the lot. Every time he came back to the same question. Did I hear anything they said? Any shouting? Any words at all? I knew how important that would be, some phrase he could use, but all I could remember was the silent shapes on the other side of the glass. I told him the only thing I was sure of, that I hadn't heard a thing from them, not even a shout. Between us there had been thick glass. I found out more the next day from news reports. I was supposed to fix a client bug that morning. Instead, I sat at my desk, refreshing the same article. Her full name was printed there, with her exact age. Roxana Miller, 38, mother of 2 teenagers, Denny's server. They said she had worked that shift pattern for years. The picture showed her at home, holding a birthday cake. No apron, no coffee stains, just a normal, tired smile. Below the photo, the article explained the divorce and harassment. I scrolled slowly, reading every line like it was code. According to the report, her ex-husband David never accepted. For 8 months after the divorce, he kept showing up. He would sit in his car outside her house night. He appeared at school events and work breaks, cornering her. She changed the locks twice after finding him near porch. The article mentioned a restraining order and threats sent text. He told her she'd regret taking the house he wanted. There were arguments about selling it, splitting money, starting separately. Reading it, I could hear their parking lot conversation anyway. I still had no words, just their shapes through glass. What surprised me most was how fast they caught him. The news said officers found him 40 minutes after attack. He was checked into a cheap motel 15 miles away. He used his name, SUV parked crooked near the door. No attempt to run, no cleaning, nothing looked like planning. Seeing that in print made the thing feel even dumber. This man planned long enough to stalk, then collapsed afterward. Months later, I searched her name and found the sentencing. Second-degree murder, 25 years possibility of parole later. The detective called it measure of justice. It sounded hollow. The article finally mentioned the red streak I had ignored. It was not sauce. It was blood that hit glass. That line had dried while I walked past it clueless. I went back to Denny's once, days afterward, sitting alone. Inside, everything looked normal, different server, regulars reclaiming their booths. Outside, that rusty diagonal stain still marked the front window. I realized I brushed near it while talking to officers. 3 days after, they closed place for cleaning and repairs. I stood in parking lot across the street and watched. A worker in gloves scrubbed glass until it finally disappeared. I have not gone back inside that Denny's even once. After what happened, I avoid working in public at night. If I do, I never sit blind to the parking. Anytime there is a window, I keep checking outside constantly. A car idling too long, someone pacing, it jumps out. At night, my brain drags me back into that lot. I dream I stand up sooner, shout, bang on glass. Sometimes in the dream, I reach the door in time, but mostly it plays the way. I freeze, dialing slowly. In reality, investigator told me I could not change anything. He said it was over in seconds, before could react. Logically, I know that, but head rewrites the timeline anyway. I picture standing up when the argument turned into pushing. Maybe if I had moved then, he would backed off. That is the loop I run while staring at ceilings. They buried Roxana at Greenwood Cemetery a week after happened. Her kids spoke at the service, according to another article. I stared at that line for a time, feeling sick. I did not go, because I had no idea what could I say after watching her die through glass. About a year ago, I was working on a personal research project about local history. I'm not a historian or anything. I just got weirdly hooked on old maps and photos of my neighborhood and wanted to match who lived where, what used to stand on certain corners, stuff like that. Most of what I needed wasn't online, so the only way to see it was the big public library downtown. One evening after work, around 7, I headed straight there. The place is 3 floors, pretty big, and even at night it isn't empty. Kids at the computers, students with headphones, older people half asleep over newspapers. I went straight to the 2nd floor where the local history section is. First, I sat at a catalog computer, typed in the titles I needed, and scribbled a list of call numbers on a scrap of paper. Then I walked into the stacks with that list in my hand. It was normal library quiet. I followed the labels, found the first book, flipped through a few pages to make sure it was what I needed, then tucked it under my arm and kept going. After maybe 20 minutes of walking from row to row, I turned into a new aisle and noticed a woman standing at the far end. She looked late 30s, medium height, gray coat down to her knees, dark scarf over her hair. She was turned toward the books, head tilted like she was reading the spines. Nothing about her really stood out. I squeezed past her at one point, muttered a quick, "Sorry." She didn't react, but that's pretty normal in a library, so I didn't think much of it. I grabbed another couple of books from a different section and then headed over to where they keep the archival folders and old photocopied documents. A few minutes later, I walked past the end of another row and saw her again. Same woman, now in the next aisle over, in almost the exact same position, like someone had just moved her one shelf to the side. It registered as a little off, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Same floor, same subject area, maybe she was hunting the same topic. I tried not to look again. I found the folders I needed, checked the dates, and decided I should double-check how late the reading room stayed open before I settled in. because I still had work in the morning. So I took my stack and went down the main stairs to the first floor. At the bottom, there's a little sign with the hours printed on it. I stopped there, read that I still had plenty of time, and for whatever reason, I glanced back up the staircase. She was there, a few steps above where I'd just been. Same coat, same scarf. She was walking down at almost the same pace I'd used, like she'd matched my timing without thinking about it. When my eyes hit her, she flicked her gaze away too fast, suddenly very interested in the railing. That was the first moment it felt wrong, like I wasn't just crossing paths with some random person anymore. I wanted to know if I was imagining it, so instead of turning toward the reading room like I'd planned, I pivoted toward the exit as if I was done for the night. I walked up to the glass doors, then stopped at the bulletin board beside them and pretended to read flyers. In the reflection, I could see most of the lobby behind me. I stood there for maybe a minute, doing this fake, interested in community events act, then shifted my head just enough to look around. She was there again, maybe 15 feet to my right, in front of another bulletin board. She was angled toward the papers, but her eyes weren't really moving. From where I stood, I could see she was watching me from the side, just barely turned. My heart started pounding. I remember thinking, okay, this isn't random. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe she'd mistaken me for someone, or maybe she wanted to ask me something and didn't know how I don't like confrontation. But the idea of her silently orbiting me all evening felt worse than one awkward conversation. I decided to walk over and ask if she needed help, or if something was wrong. I turned fully toward her and took a step. As soon as I did, she snapped her head away, spun toward the doors, and walked fast. Not quite running, but that tight, rushed walk people do when they really want out. She pushed one of the doors open and went straight outside without looking back once. I stopped where I was, suddenly very aware of how open and quiet the lobby felt. I stood there pretending to read the flyers a little longer, waiting for my pulse to slow down. After a minute, I convinced myself she'd just realized she'd been obvious and got embarrassed. People are strange, I thought, and that was the end of it. Or that was what I decided. I went back up to the second floor, picked up the books and documents I'd left on the table, slid my notes into my backpack, and headed down again. On the first floor, I spent maybe 10 minutes at the copier, making a few pages from the older documents so I wouldn't have to come back right away. When I finished, I paid at the machine, stuffed the copies into my backpack between two books, and finally walked toward the exit for real. The big wall clock said it was around 8:30. Outside the glass doors, it was already dark, but the street lights and the lobby glow made the short sidewalk bright enough. My car was parked in the side lot, maybe 50 yards away, so I stepped out and started along the path that runs past the corner of the building. Even now, I remember the mix of relief and leftover tension, that lazy thought about what I'd read first when I got home, and then how fast it all snapped back the second I turned the corner and saw her standing by the side of the library near the low bushes in that same gray coat, not pretending to look at anything, just facing roughly in my direction until our eyes finally met, and she jerked her head away and walked toward the street. In the opposite direction from me, I walked faster toward my car without actually running, unlocked it with the remote, and slid inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and tried to calm down by doing everything in order: mirrors, seatbelt, lights. Pulling out of the space felt like leaving the whole thing behind, and for a minute I convinced myself it was just a weird woman, and a weird moment I turned out of the lot onto the main road and merged with traffic. 2 blocks later, I hit a red light, stopped, and, without really thinking about it, glanced up at the rearview mirror. Behind me was a gray sedan with a taxi sign on the roof, close enough that I could see someone in the front, but not their face. That alone was nothing. There are always cabs around the center, but my stomach dropped anyway. The next big intersection was where I usually turned right to go home. When the light changed, I turned like always, then checked the mirror out of habit and watched the taxi turn right after me. I told myself I was being dramatic. That road led to houses, a gas station, a store. Lots of people used it. Still, I wanted to know. At the next light, instead of going straight, I turned left onto a side street I almost never use, just a quiet block that loops around. When I straightened out and checked the mirror, the taxi had turned left too and was holding the same distance. Now my chest felt tight. I drove another block, made a random right, then another left. No pattern, no shortcut, just turns to see what the cab would do. Every time I turned, it turned. I knew I did not want to lead this person to my apartment. Pulling over on one of those empty blocks felt worse, so I tried to think of somewhere bright and obvious. I remembered there was a police station a few minutes away on a bigger cross street. I headed that way, keeping my speed normal, watching the mirror while pretending I was not. The taxi stayed right there behind me. When the station building came into view on the corner, I put my turn signal on early, turned onto the street in front of it, and pulled into the small visitor lot. The taxi followed the turn, then just drove past and disappeared around the next corner. I parked facing the entrance and sat there with the engine off, watching the mirrors for a couple of minutes to see if it came back. When nothing did, I finally went inside. The lobby was plain, a few chairs, a vending machine, a glass window with a slot at the bottom. A uniformed officer sat behind a computer. I walked up, cleared my throat, and said, "This is going to sound paranoid, but I think someone from the library followed me here in a taxi." He did not laugh. He asked me to start from the beginning, so I told him everything, from the stacks to the bushes to the cab. He took my statement, had me fill out a short form, and asked me to describe her in the taxi. All I really had was medium height, a gray coat, a dark scarf, no clear face, and a gray cab with no plate, I remembered. He said they could not really do anything and told me to call if I ever saw her again. I left, drove home a different route checking mirrors, watched for her, and never learned why. I was working as an ER nurse in Tampa when I was 26, and my shifts often ended at 2 a.m. After the really bad nights, when we lost someone or had 3 codes back to back, I hated standing around waiting for the night bus that almost never came. Walking home felt better. It was just under a mile, straight through a quiet residential area I'd walked 100 times. That night I clocked out a little after 2:30 a.m., changed into jeans and a hoodie, signed out my badge, and told the charge nurse I was fine to walk. I remember thinking about nothing except a hot shower and how much my feet hurt. The first 10 minutes were completely normal. Empty sidewalks, a couple of sprinklers hissing, cars lined tight along the curb. The streetlights gave everything that dull yellow hospital hallway glow I was used to. I wasn't jumpy. I was just worn out. I kept replaying a trauma from earlier in my head, half listening to my own footsteps and glancing at my phone every now and then out of habit. When I turned onto Elm Street, I noticed a dark sedan for the first time. It was on the opposite side of the street, moving slowly, hugging the curb. No loud music, no jerky movements, just rolling along at about my walking speed. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drive slow when they're looking for an address or messing with GPS. I told myself it was that. I shifted my bag higher on my shoulder and kept going. About a block later, I realized it hadn't passed me or turned. It just kind of floated parallel with me, a little ahead, then a little behind, like whoever was driving was unconsciously matching me. I got that small electric jolt in my chest you get when your brain quietly says, "Hey, pay attention." I forced myself to stay casual, gave one quick side look. All I could make out was a dark shape behind the wheel and tint on the windows. No clear face, nothing obvious. I looked forward again. At the next intersection, I turned right like I usually did. The sedan rolled a few feet past the corner, then made the same turn, ending up behind me now instead of beside me. Not super close, maybe 60 feet back, but centered in the lane, headlights on my back. My stomach flipped. Normal people don't copy some random woman's turn at almost 3 a.m. for no reason. I sped up a little so my breathing changed, but I tried to keep my body language calm. In my head, I decided I needed to know if this was in my head or not. At the next corner, I took a left onto a narrow side street I basically never used at night. It dead-ended by some townhouses. It made zero sense as a shortcut to anywhere. If they followed me there, it was deliberate. The sedan turned left after me. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I forced my shoulders to stay loose because I didn't want to look like prey. I pulled my phone out, unlocked the black screen, held it to my ear, and said, loud enough to carry, "Yeah, I'm almost home. Yeah, meet me at the door in 2 minutes." Then I added a fake little laugh, like someone was actually waiting. Nothing changed. The car didn't speed up, didn't peel off, just held the same distance, engine low and steady. I reached the end of the side street, turned again, basically looping myself around the block. There was absolutely no normal reason to follow that pattern unless you were watching me. The sedan turned again too, same smooth turn, like it was attached to me by a rope. My mouth went dry. That was the moment it stopped being maybe and became, okay, this is real. I started scanning ahead fast, looking for anything open. On the corner of the next block I saw it, a little 24-hour convenience store, lights on, bright sign lit. I locked onto that like a lifeboat and headed straight for it, cutting across the crosswalk without even checking the light. I didn't run, but every step felt heavy. As soon as I walked inside, the glass door hissing shut behind me, I glanced back through it. The sedan rolled forward and stopped directly across the street from the store, nose pointed toward the entrance, engine still running. It just sat there. There was one employee behind the counter, a skinny guy who looked maybe 22. I went straight up to him, keeping my voice low but steady. "Hey, I need some help. That car out there has been following me for a while," I said. "I think somebody's watching me." I pointed toward the window without turning all the way around. His expression changed immediately. He leaned to look, then grabbed the store phone. He called the police right away, repeating what I'd told him, then said, "You can wait in the back if you want, just in case." I said yes. From the open doorway into the stockroom, we could still see the front window. The sedan stayed there, idling, for what felt like forever. He checked the clock and muttered that it had been about 7 minutes. Finally, it eased away, slow and casual, and disappeared down the street. Roughly 10 minutes after that, a police cruiser pulled into the lot. The officers came in, asked us to walk through everything, and the cashier rattled off the license plate number from memory like he did it every day. They wrote it down, took my statement and what little description I could give, and then insisted on escorting me the rest of the way home. I remember walking into my apartment with 2 armed cops and realizing how easily that night could have gone another way if that store had been closed. I honestly thought it would end there. Just a creepy, maybe stalker story I'd tell coworkers later. But a week later, an investigator called me and asked if I could come down to the station. In a small office, he told me they'd run the plate, and the car belonged to a man with 2 prior charges for stalking women, same pattern as mine. He would trail them after late shifts and hang around near their houses, and in one case he had tried to grab a woman near her front door. They arrested him off my report, but he kept saying he had just been driving in the same direction. And because there was no camera footage of that night or any physical contact with me, the most they got out of it was a restraining order and a fine. I was disappointed with how little actually happened to him. But I was also honestly grateful anything happened at all. It was a weird mix. Part of me kept looping back to the same thought. If I had not gone into that store, if I had just tried to speed walk the rest of the way home, nobody would have written anything down. There would be no report, no plate number, nothing connecting him to anyone that night. A couple days after I met with the investigator, my phone buzzed with a number I did not know. The text said, "Hey, this is Dave from the store, just checking on you." For a second, my stomach dropped, because I had been waiting for some kind of bad news, another call from the police. Then I remembered we had traded numbers in case court needed us. I sat there on my couch, uniform pants still on, staring at that message longer than I should have before I wrote back that I was okay, just tired, and thanked him again for stepping in that day. We ended up texting on and off that whole week, not in a romantic way, just two people trying to calm down after something that had scared both of us. He admitted he had been pretty shaken that night, that he had never had to call the police for anything serious before. I told him I kept replaying the walk in my head, trying to see the exact second I should have realized I was being followed. I kept saying, I should have taken a picture of the car, or I should have called someone as soon as it felt off. He kept telling me the same thing. You did the right thing. You went somewhere public. That is why you are okay. I knew that, but I still felt dumb for not thinking to use the camera in my hand on that street. After that, I never walked home after a shift again. That decision was instant. If I could not get a ride with a coworker, I called a taxi. If the taxi was going to take a bit, I waited inside the hospital lobby where there were cameras and security. I also started paying more attention to what my coworkers were doing after nights. If someone said they were going to walk, I pushed a little, asked if they wanted to split a ride, or at least asked them to text when they got home. It was not about being paranoid. It was just knowing how fast a normal night could tilt sideways after long shifts. The thing I regret most from that night is still the same. Not snapping a photo of the sedan when I had the chance. I would lie there in bed thinking about the moment I had my phone at my ear, pretending to talk, and how I could have just lowered it and hit the button. But then I remember how focused I was on not showing my fear, on not letting whoever was driving see that I had noticed him. When you are scared, your brain shrinks down to one task: get safe. People online love to say what they would have done. In reality, you do what you can with the pieces your mind is holding on to in that second, in that empty, quiet street. There is one image that still sticks with me harder than the rest. It is not the walk, or even the inside of the police station. It is standing just inside that store, looking through the glass and seeing the sedan sitting across the street, engine running, not parking, not leaving, just there. Every time I think about it, I picture him sitting there, weighing his options. And that is the part that bothers me the most, that he was actively deciding whether it was worth the risk to come after me while I watched. Later, during one of our text conversations, Dave told me something that made my skin crawl again. He said he had seen that same sedan before I walked through the door. It had gone past the store, then come back the other way minutes later, like it was circling the block. At the time, he did not think much of it, because people cut through that lot and used the corner to turn around there. He said the guy behind the wheel looked totally normal. That was the word he kept repeating. Normal. No wild expression, no obvious drunk sway, just a man sitting there, hands on the wheel, staring straight at the entrance. Reading that made me feel cold all over. You grow up assuming danger is going to look obvious, that there will be some sign. But people like that blend right in. They are in line behind you buying snacks. They are parked on your street. They are just driving in the same direction until suddenly they are not. The investigator told me I was lucky in a way that did not feel good. He mentioned one of the man's other victims, another woman leaving a late shift, except she had not been anywhere near an open store. He tried to grab her near her building. She fought like hell, scratched him up, and ran. And by the time officers got there, he was gone. Hearing that made everything feel heavier. It was not random that he followed me. This was a routine for him, something he had done before and was willing to do again. That is why I tell this story so much now. Especially to younger nurses and techs starting nights, I probably sound like someone's overprotective aunt, but I do not care. I tell them to walk in groups when they can, to call rides, not to talk themselves out of that first bad feeling because they are worried about overreacting. I tell them not to take shortcuts through side streets just because they are tired. If your gut tells you something is off, get somewhere public and call for help, even if you end up feeling silly later. Embarrassment fades. The other outcomes do not. Knowing how close I came and how many tiny choices lined up in my favor that night keeps me alert every time I step outside after dark. And if sharing all of this makes even one person stop and listen to that instinct, then it is worth repeating. It happened last year when I started noticing weird coincidences in my life. I was 26, working as a marketing manager in Austin, Texas, doing a cycle of emails, meetings, and Netflix. At first, the stuff was tiny. I'd think about someone from high school, and they'd message me, or I'd have a song stuck in my head, and it would already be playing when I turned on the radio. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Social media connects everyone. Radio stations repeat the same 10 songs, and my brain only notices the hits, not the misses. I even joked to my coworkers that I was having a main character arc. But under the jokes, there was this tight feeling in my chest, like something was slightly out of place and I just couldn't put my finger on it. Then the coincidences started lining up with things I wanted, not just people. I'd think about buying a specific style of shoe or a certain kitchen gadget, never search anything, and that night it would show up in the first ad. I saw not broad categories, the exact thing. That was when it stopped feeling funny and started feeling like something was leaning over my shoulder, listening to me constantly. Because I work in marketing, I tried really hard to talk myself out of freaking out. Algorithms are good at guessing, cross-device tracking is everywhere, and my own brain loves patterns. I went through every app on my phone, turned off microphone access, disabled random permissions, logged out of stuff I didn't need. For a few weeks that helped, but the coincidences didn't slow down. If anything, they got tighter. In March, I was pacing my apartment on the phone with my friend Lila, talking about trips we wanted to take. I mentioned this tiny restaurant in New York I'd read about years ago on some obscure food blog. I couldn't remember the name, just the description. I'd never searched it. The next morning, I opened a random newsletter, and the first restaurant on their list was that exact place. I stared at that email too long, then forced myself to delete it. A week later at work, I told a coworker my knee hurt from running. I hadn't Googled it because I was avoiding doctors. That night, my Instagram ad was an orthopedic clinic. After that, I started dreaming about unfamiliar places and then seeing identical photos online. So I opened a note titled Coincidences and began logging everything. By the end of that month, there were more than 20 entries in the note. Seeing them listed like that made my stomach drop. It didn't look like random hits anymore. It looked like something mapping onto me. One night at my boyfriend Evan's place, while we were making pasta, I finally told him everything and showed him the list on my phone. He laughed but knew I was serious. He said phones are always listening. Advertisers know everything. and it was creepy but normal, not magic. When I didn't look convinced, he suggested an experiment. Turn off microphone access for every app, leave my phone somewhere else, and talk about something I'd never searched. If the ad still found it, then we'd know it was more than just lazy paranoia. I agreed, to prove him right and calm myself. That weekend we did it. We killed every microphone permission, left my phone powered on, but sitting on my dresser, and I drove to his place with just my keys and wallet. There we picked something random. I said I wanted to learn the ukulele. We joked about it for a while and then dropped it. No phones or smart speakers anywhere near us. It felt silly, but also necessary. 2 days later, my first YouTube ad at lunch was for ukulele lessons. My history was clean, and Evan suddenly stopped joking. He wanted a second test, so we picked the phrase, medieval manuscripts, and repeated it with my phone left at home. 3 days later, an ad for a paleography course appeared at work, and I actually started panicking, because if it wasn't my phone, then what was it? I went into full damage control mode after that paleography ad. I checked my laptop for viruses and spyware, ran every scan I could find, even some sketchy free tools I normally wouldn't touch. Nothing showed up. My phone scans came back clean too. I changed every password, turned on two-factor for everything, and logged out of any account I didn't absolutely need. It kept my hands busy, but the tight feeling in my chest didn't go away. At night I started reading about surveillance and data collection, the long technical articles that usually make people's eyes glaze over. I read about how apps track location, how ad networks build profiles, how microphones can be triggered. A lot of it matched what I already knew from working in marketing. But when I compared it to my list of coincidences, it still didn't fit. My stuff was too specific, too fast. Even knowing all the tricks, I couldn't see a normal path from my behavior to those results. Then something happened that had nothing to do with any device. My mom called me in April and said she'd been cleaning out the attic and found a box with my old drawings and letters from elementary school. She sounded amused, said she'd mail me a few because they were cute and ridiculous. I didn't think much about it until an envelope showed up with a small stack of wrinkled notebook pages in childish handwriting. Most of it was normal kid nonsense, but one letter made my hands go cold. It was dated 2005 and addressed to future me. In it, 8-year-old me wrote about a dream where I was grown up, working in a big city in an office with glass walls, and I had a dog named Luna who slept under my desk. I read it twice, then checked the date again. In 2023, I was working in Austin, in a glass-walled office, and 2 months earlier, I had adopted a dog and named her Luna. I had no memory of that dream or that letter. None. I don't remember ever writing to my future self. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that page for a long time, trying to reach back in my head for any trace of it and getting nothing. That night I took the letter to Evan's place. I didn't explain right away, I just handed it to him. He read it, laughed, and said something like, "This is weirdly on brand for you." Then he looked at the date, touched the paper, and you could see the joke die on his face. The page was old, slightly yellowed, full of spelling mistakes. It wasn't something you fake in an afternoon. We sat there going back and forth. His first thought was that maybe my mom was messing with me. I told him she didn't even know my office had glass walls, and she definitely didn't know the name of my dog. The next idea was that I'd read the letter sometime in the past, forgotten it, and the memory sat hidden until it shaped my choices later. That at least sounded possible. It would mean my own brain had been nudging me quietly for years. But I still couldn't remember ever seeing that letter before. The whole thing felt like one more item thrown on top of a pile that was already too high. When I got home, I opened my coincidences note and added the letter as a new entry. Then I scrolled through everything from top to bottom, all the way back to the first song on the radio. Seeing it all laid out like that made me feel less like someone dealing with random weird luck and more like someone trapped in a setup they didn't agree to. Since the letter, I've been moving through my life like I'm handling something fragile. I still go to work, walk Luna, see Evan, talk to my friends. From the outside, I probably look normal. Inside, I'm tracking every thought, every small wish, every offhand comment. I stopped talking about personal plans anywhere near my phone or laptop. I started writing things down on paper instead of in notes apps. Simple stuff like buy new running shoes or maybe take a weekend trip, and then hiding the paper in a drawer. Even doing that, the coincidences haven't really stopped. Some weeks there are only one or two, some weeks there are several, but they keep showing up just close enough that I can't fully relax. Since then, I've been living with this steady sense that something is off about reality itself. Either there is a level of surveillance and manipulation we don't know about yet, or there is some other process at work that connects thoughts, memories, and future events in a way I don't understand. I've gone back and forth 100 times on whether this is just me losing it, building a pattern in my head because I'm anxious and paying too much attention. Or maybe we really are being watched and nudged a lot more closely than any of us think. I don't have an answer. All I know is I can't shake the feeling that my thoughts aren't private anymore, that they're being read and used by something or someone I can't see. I'm a guy who's had the same nightmare my whole life about a fire in a high-rise, and on my first day working in an office on the 34th floor in Dallas, I ended up facing a real fire in the tower next to us. When the smoke started seeping through the office vents, I knew my recurring nightmare had finally crossed over into real life. I've been having those dreams since I was a teenager, not frame for frame identical, but always the same idea. I'm high up in some tower, looking out at another skyscraper, and somewhere on the middle floors I see flames punching through the glass. In the dream, I always know it's that nightmare again. I tell myself, no, this time it's real. You have to move, find the stairs, don't waste time. And then I either wake up or jolt myself awake reaching for a door that isn't there. They stuck with me through exams, first jobs, breakups, the usual stuff. After a while, I treated them like background noise, just one more weird thing my brain did. I'm pretty skeptical by nature, so prophetic never crossed my mind. Still, when I started job hunting that year, I noticed I kept scrolling past postings that mentioned panoramic views and top floors. I told myself it was because I hate crowded elevators, not because of some dream. Then this financial company called with a solid offer, good benefits, actual stability. Saying no because the office was in a downtown high-rise would have been insane. August 15th, 2016 was my first day. I was 38, overdressed in a suit that already felt too warm by the time I crossed the plaza. Dallas heat pressed in even that late in the day. The AC upstairs was doing its best, but you could still feel the thick air. Orientation started around noon and just kept going. HR talked policies, IT walked us through logins, some VP gave a speech about joining the family. By a little after 6, there were maybe 5 of us left in the conference room with Carol from HR, who kept laughing and saying, "I promise I'll get you out of here soon." Our department space was on the east side of the floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked straight out at another glass tower across the corporate center. Carol pointed at it while we were walking past, told me a big law firm was over there, joked that we'd know when their bonuses hit because their parking lot turned into a luxury car show. While she talked, I caught myself doing this habit I have now in any tall building. Clocking the green exit signs, counting the doors to the stairwell, making a mental map. I wasn't expecting disaster. It just made me feel calmer. I was at Carol's desk, going over health insurance options, when I noticed this oily orange reflection moving across the glass wall behind her. At first, I assumed sunset, but then I remembered the sunsets on the other side of the building, and we'd already lost the direct light an hour earlier. The color kept shifting. I actually stopped mid-sentence, walked over to the window, and looked at the neighboring tower. Fire was already blowing out of several busted windows about 6 floors below us. Flames were curling out into the open air, then whipping upward along the building's skin. Black smoke poured up and sideways at the same time. For a second, my body did that thing it does in the dream, this frozen recognition. Then Carol stepped up beside me, saw it, and just whispered, "Oh my God," with her hand over her mouth. That tiny, normal reaction snapped everything into focus. This wasn't my brain. This was right across from us. Within what felt like seconds, sirens started up below. First one, then several overlapping through office windows in that tower. I could see people on other floors moving fast, some backing away, some just staring down at the burning level. Somewhere behind us, someone yelled that we needed to move away from the windows. Another voice said the fire department would handle it and we should stay calm. The alarms in our own building hadn't gone off yet, and there was this awful limbo where everybody just waited to be told exactly what to do. When the alarm finally did start blaring, the evacuation kicked off in the worst possible way, with conflicting instructions. A manager near the elevators shouted that protocol said to shelter in place unless told otherwise. A security guard at the end of the hall yelled back that elevators were shut down and everyone needed to use the stairs now. People started packing up laptops and grabbing bags even as they moved. I remember looking from the glowing red exit sign over the stairwell door back to the fire across the gap and feeling this cold line clicking through. High rise, fire outside, me on a mid-30 floor heading for the stairs. It was almost a perfect match. I told Carol we were leaving and headed for the stairwell. By then, the hallway had turned into a slow-moving column of people, nobody running, everyone crowding in the same direction. The door opened, and the stairwell was already full of bodies and warm air. It smelled like sweat and copier toner, and, faintly, smoke from somewhere above or below. We merged into the stream. Step, turn, step, turn. 34 down to 33 to 32, counting without meaning to. The whole time I kept thinking about the small differences between this and the dream. In the nightmare, the fire always jumps to our building. In real life, it was still across the way. If it had started in our tower, if that smoke had come pouring out of this concrete shaft instead of the vents, this steady shuffle could have turned into something a lot worse. It took a while to reach the bottom. My legs were rubber, and my shirt was soaked by the time we pushed out into the lobby. Security and firefighters were already there, funneling people out through side doors, shouting building numbers and company names, trying to keep everyone separated. Outside, the heat from the day had finally started to break, but the air had this burnt chemical edge to it. I got Carol over to a group from our floor, told her I'd text once I found my car, and slipped out toward the far end of the lot. From my car window, I could see almost the entire side of the neighboring tower. Ladders were up, hoses arcing, whole sections of the building soaked. The bright band of fire that had been there earlier was now mostly smoke and steam. News crews had set up on the sidewalk, bright lights pointed at talking heads with the damaged floors behind them. I sat there longer than I needed to, engine off, hands on the wheel, just watching them work. They contained the flames by around midnight. Later, we heard that nobody in that building had been seriously hurt, just smoke inhalation and a few minor burns. That should have been the end of it, just a scary first day at a new job. But driving home with sirens still echoing behind me, all I could think about were the dreams I'd had for 23 years, and how easily the details could have shifted so that it was our tower on the news instead. Knowing that everyone was basically okay didn't stop the thoughts racing through my head. The next morning, I drove into the same parking garage, and for a second, it almost felt like a normal workday. Then I opened my door and caught that thin, burned smell still hanging in the air. It wasn't strong, not like the night before, but it was there. When I stepped out onto the plaza and saw the other tower in daylight, my stomach dropped. A whole vertical strip of windows was just black. Some were boarded over. Some were empty frames with twisted metal and little triangles of glass still clinging to the edges. You could see exactly where the fire had climbed. Our lobby looked mostly normal. The elevators were running, the coffee line was full, people were talking about traffic and kids and deadlines. There was some tape near one entrance and a couple of extra security guys, but if you hadn't seen the smoke, you'd think it was just a busy morning. That part messed with me. The speed of it. Last night, sirens, flames, people packed into stairwells. This morning, lattes and badge swipes. On the 34th floor, it was the same weird mix. IT fixing a printer, my manager already on a call in his glass office, Carol typing fast at her desk. When she saw me, she stood up right away and asked if I got home okay, if I slept at all. I told her yeah, I was fine, just tired. That was technically true, I'd slept maybe 2 hours. The rest of the night I lay there with my eyes open, running through that staircase in my head and waiting to hear an alarm that never came. I had zero intention of telling anyone about the dream thing. It sounded insane even to me, and I'm the one who lived it. But about an hour into the day, I ended up by the east windows with a little group from our floor, all of us staring at the burned-out section across the plaza. People traded guesses about the cause. Someone said break room. Someone else said electrical. Nobody really knew anything concrete yet. Carol was quiet for a long time. Then she looked over and asked, "You really were the first one who saw it, right?" I told her I'd noticed something weird in the reflection on the glass wall and went to check. She just kept watching me like she was waiting for whatever came next. So I gave her a safe version. I said I'd had this recurring dream for years about being in a tall office, looking out at another tower on fire. And maybe that was why the reflection bothered me so fast I didn't mention the floor height lining up, or the angle of the flames through the windows, or the exact same feeling in my chest when I turned toward the stairs. I just said, "Guess my brain filed it in the same folder." I was ready for her to laugh or make a joke, but she didn't. She just nodded and said, "Well, whatever it was, good thing you looked," and went back to her desk. The rest of the day was all emails and memos, safety procedures, evacuation reminders, counseling resources, official wording that took this chaotic, loud, terrifying thing and turned it into the incident at the adjacent property. Every time I tried to focus on a form or a training video, my eyes drifted to those charred windows. And every time I looked, the same thought came back. 23 years of the same basic dream, and my first day in this office ends with me watching almost the exact scene play out, down to the time of day, and the need to hit the stairs. I kept telling myself it had to be coincidence, that lots of people dream about fires, tall buildings, disasters. But saying it and believing it were two completely different things. I still work in that building 3 years later. Sometimes, when I'm bored in a meeting or waiting on a spreadsheet to load, I'll end up at those same east-facing windows, looking over at the law firm tower. On the surface, it's all fixed now. Clean glass, polished facade, people back at their desks. If you didn't know, you'd never point to those floors and say, "There, that's where it burned." But I can't unsee it. My brain fills the flames back in every time. At some point during that first year, I went down this rabbit hole online about prophetic dreams, precognition, all that stuff. I read articles and a couple of studies that either leaned hard into mystical explanations or tore the whole idea apart with statistics. Most of the reasonable ones boiled down to the same thing. We dream about a lot of random scenarios. We live through a lot of random events, and sometimes the shapes overlap. You remember the overlap and forget the thousands of misses. The logical part of my brain grabbed onto that. It made sense. Big city, lots of high-rises, fires happen. People have anxiety dreams about danger all the time. Eventually, someone's going to have a story like mine. But there's this other part of me that I can't shut up. Especially when it's 2 in the morning and I'm just lying there awake. That part keeps thinking about the timing. 23 years of the same nightmare coming and going at random. Always the same setup. Always the same push to find the stairs. Then one night the real scene finally matches it, almost detail for detail. And the dreams stop. Not slowly fading out. Not showing up less often. Just done. I haven't had that nightmare once since the fire. Most days, I file it under weird but explainable and focus on normal stuff like deadlines and bills and whether I packed lunch. On the nights when my brain won't quiet down though, I catch myself wondering if that whole string of dreams was nothing, just noise, or if it was some kind of rehearsal for one specific day that finally arrived. And now I'm just waiting to find out what I'll only recognize the next time when I'm already standing in the middle of it. The sound of breaking glass at 3 a.m. isn't something you forget easily. I was up instantly, heart pounding, already trying to figure out what in our garage could even make that noise. A second later, I heard it again. Not an accident this time, but sharp, spaced-out hits against glass, like someone was swinging a hammer or throwing the same heavy rock over and over. Beside me, Tom jerked awake, grabbed his phone off the nightstand, and muttered, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer, because I was already sliding out of bed and going to the window, half expecting to see nothing and feel stupid for panicking. Instead, the porch motion light clicked on, and there he was. A man, just a dark shape at first, walking right across our front yard like he lived there. He wasn't running. He didn't duck or freeze when the light came on. He just kept going, slow and steady, head turning toward each downstairs window like he had a checklist he was working through. I whispered for Tom to call 911, and I could hear him already talking to the dispatcher, voice tight but calm, in that way he gets when he's scared and trying not to show it. I watched the guy move from the dining room window to the one by the living room, palm resting casually on the glass each time, testing the frames. The way he did it was what got to me. It wasn't clumsy. It was practiced. Familiar. It hit me all at once that this probably wasn't the first time he'd walked around this house in the dark. That was the first moment I thought, not, someone's breaking in, but, we inherited someone's problem when we signed those papers. When I was 28, Tom and I thought we'd finally beaten the system. 3 bedrooms, a little yard, quiet street outside the city, all for a price that made the mortgage broker raise his eyebrows and double-check the numbers. The realtor, a woman named Lisa, kept pushing the word opportunity. She said the previous owner, Roger Klein, had to unload the property fast after a messy divorce. She didn't elaborate, and we didn't ask. We were tired of tiny apartments and noisy neighbors. A weird backstory and a slightly overgrown yard didn't scare us. I should have guessed something was off the first week we moved in. The older couple across the street brought over cookies, super friendly, asking where we moved from, what we did for work, normal stuff. But there was this tiny pause when Tom mentioned our exact address, like they blinked a little slower. The husband said, "Oh yeah, Klein's place," and changed the subject so fast it almost felt rehearsed. Same kind of thing with the guy next door when he helped Tom carry in the washer. He joked, "Well, hey, at least the cops already know how to get here." Then laughed like he'd said something harmless, but his eyes didn't match the smile. I brushed it off as small-town weirdness, the kind of gossip that clings to a house after one loud argument or a bad breakup. 5 months in, we were settled into a routine we'd painted, put up cheap shelves, argued about rugs, hosted a couple of small dinners. The house finally felt like ours, not like we were crashing in someone else's life. The mail that still showed up for Roger went straight into a drawer to deal with later. I stopped noticing the way people reacted when we gave our address. It was just background noise. Then came that night, and suddenly it felt like we'd never really been alone there at all. While Tom was on the phone with 911, I stayed at the window watching the man. He was big, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, wearing a work jacket and moving with purpose. He didn't look drunk or lost. He walked like he had a plan and had done this exact route before. He tried the side door to the garage, gripping the handle like he was sure it would open. When it didn't, he didn't get frustrated or look around for cameras. He just moved on, disappearing along the side of the house toward the back. Losing sight of him was worse than seeing him. I could hear Tom say our address to the dispatcher, hear the woman tell him officers were 12 minutes out. 12 minutes felt like forever. After that, I had to follow him by sound. A faint clatter from the basement door. A dull thump, like a shoulder testing the frame instead of a fist. Then, clear through the quiet, this scraping noise. Metal against metal, slow and controlled, like someone working on a lock they already knew. Our dogs went insane downstairs, barking non-stop, nails scrambling on the floor as they ran from the front door to the back, not sure where the threat was. I remember saying, "He's done this before," and realizing I'd said it out loud when Tom stopped talking to the dispatcher for half a second. The man came back into view near the middle of our yard and stopped. For the first time, he wasn't touching anything, not testing doors or windows. He just planted his feet and faced the house. The porch light caught enough of his face for me to see he was totally focused. Not high, not stumbling, not confused. His head tilted slightly, like he was lining up where things used to be in his mind, trying to match whatever memory he had of this place to what he was looking at now. And with the police still minutes away, my partner whispering behind me, and the dogs losing it downstairs, he stood in the middle of our yard and just stared at the house, like he was trying to remember something. The cops showed up close to when the dispatcher said they would, lights washing over the front of the house. The second the first cruiser turned onto our street, the guy in the yard moved. It was like a switch flipped. He turned, jogged toward the back, and cleared our fence into the little park behind us like it was nothing. By the time 2 officers were in our yard with flashlights and hands near their guns, he was gone. They pushed through the gate, swept the trees, called out, but nobody answered. One officer came inside to take statements, while the other kept going around the house, checking windows and doors, stopping to look closely at the garage and the basement door like he was trying to picture how the guy had worked his way around. In the morning, we finally saw everything in daylight. The garage window was smashed, glass over Tom's tools, and the floor. The frame around it was bent in, like it had taken more than one hit. At the back, the basement door was chewed up around the lock, deep marks like someone had leaned hard on a crowbar and kept trying. Near the fence, Tom pointed out 3 cigarette butts pushed into the dirt near the same spot, like somebody had stood there watching the house more than once. I followed the path back toward the porch, walked past the little row of garden gnomes we'd joked about, and stopped. One of them had thick black writing across its hat. "You know where it is." I yelled for Tom without touching it. He came over, read it, and just stared at me. "You know what that means?" he asked. I told him I didn't, and I meant it. He took pictures of everything, including the gnome, talking quietly as he did it because his hands were shaking. When the officer came back later, he bagged the cigarette butts, took more photos, and asked if anyone we knew might mess with us like that. We both said no. It didn't feel like a prank. It felt like someone sending a message to a person who used to live there, and we just happened to be the ones standing in the way. About a week later, our neighbor Frank knocked on the door with an apple pie and this stiff, guilty look. He's lived on that street for decades. He asked if he could clear something up, and we let him in. At the table, he kept folding and refolding a napkin while he talked. He said everyone had heard about the guy outside, and that he was sorry he hadn't warned us sooner. Then he told us what the realtor left out. The previous owner, Roger Klein, had gone through a brutal divorce. His ex-wife Cynthia had sued him, saying he was hiding money. Roger worked construction, did side jobs, got paid in cash a lot. The rumor was he'd hidden a big amount of cash somewhere in or around the property before the sale courts never proved it, and Cynthia never found it. But nobody on the block really believed there was nothing. Frank went on. After we bought the place, people had seen Roger parked down the street a few times, just sitting in his car, staring at the house. He never came up, never talked to anyone, just watched. Cynthia, according to Frank, had a brother who'd done time for extortion and hung around with rough people. Some of them had shown up back when Roger still owned the place, asking pointed questions, hinting that part of what he had belonged to Cynthia. Even after the sale, a couple of strange guys had come around the neighborhood asking if Roger ever talked about where he kept his money. The police had been called more than once back then. Hearing all that, the words on the gnome clicked into a different shape. It sounded less like someone accusing us and more like somebody trying to pressure Roger through whoever lived there next. After that conversation, we stopped pretending this was some one-off creepy night. We changed every lock. Tom ordered cameras that same day. Within a week, we had an alarm system, motion sensors along the fence, extra lights by the garage and basement door. Tom called the detective and asked if our address could be flagged for fast response. Nobody treated him like he was overreacting. They already knew the house, knew the names. For a while, nothing happened. We went to work, came home, watched the camera feeds more than TV. The new system caught the same car creeping down our street 3 different nights, slowing in front of our house and then continuing on. Nobody came up to the door. Nobody climbed the fence again. Early that spring, I went out to dig a new flower bed near the old oak tree in the yard. I hit something hard under the soil, not a rock. More like a flat edge, I called Tom, and we cleared the dirt until a small rusted metal box came up. For a second, we just looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. This was it. This was what everyone had been looking for. We brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were damp, stained divorce papers with Roger and Cynthia's names on them, and an empty envelope with "For Cynthia" written across it. No cash, no bonds, nothing valuable. Tom called the detective and they took the box, but that was it. Officially, the story ended there. Unofficially, it didn't. Years later, I still flinch when a car slows in front of our house at night and sits there a little too long, because I know there are people out there who will never believe the only thing we ever found was an empty envelope in someone else's mess. So I was a junior in college, 20 years old, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with this guy named Jason. We'd met through some housing group on Facebook, total strangers, before moving in together. The place was on the 2nd floor of an old building, a short walk from campus. We barely crossed paths most days. He waited tables in the evenings, and I worked daytime shifts at the university library. That particular day, I'd been running around non-stop. Morning classes, library shift, then 2 more lectures. By the time I dragged myself up the stairs and unlocked our door, it was a little after 9. Jason should have still been at work until around 11. I stepped into the hallway, flipped on the light, and something immediately felt off. A couple books were scattered across the floor, ones that normally sat on the small wall shelf. The shelf itself was crooked, like someone had bumped it hard. I stood there a second trying to picture Jason rushing out and maybe hitting it on accident, but he wasn't the rush out type. I walked into the living room and saw more weird stuff. 2 couch pillows were on the floor. The TV remote was lying by the leg of the coffee table instead of on top of it. Nothing dramatic, just wrong. I tried to talk myself into thinking Jason had been in a hurry, or maybe dropped something and didn't bother picking it up, but it didn't feel like him. Still, no obvious signs of a break-in. Door lock was fine, windows shut. So I just put everything back in place. I went to my room, dropped my backpack on the bed, changed into sweatpants, and figured a shower would fix my head. 10 minutes under hot water helped a little. I came back out feeling tired but calmer. I headed to the kitchen thinking about the leftover pizza I'd been looking forward to all day. I opened the fridge, grabbed the box, and that's when I noticed the pantry door, this little closet-like storage room between the kitchen and living room, was standing halfway open. We always kept it shut. It was where we tossed old electronics, cleaning supplies, boxes we didn't want to deal with. I walked over and closed it without really thinking about it. Just assuming Jason had dug around in there that morning, I heated my pizza in the microwave, brought it to the couch, put on something mindless on TV, and ate. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. When I got up to take my plate back to the kitchen, I started past the pantry and froze. The door was open again. Not wide, just like before, a few inches. But I knew I'd shut it firmly. I just stood there staring at the crack of darkness inside. My heart was suddenly pounding, and I had this tight, stupid feeling like I was being watched. I called out, loud, "Jason?" Thinking maybe he'd come home early without me hearing because of the TV. No answer. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. I didn't want to open the door more, so I just angled the light into the gap. The pantry was cramped, shelves on the left, boxes stacked along the right wall, old magazines piled on the floor. Nothing looked disturbed from what I could see. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, but something in me wouldn't let it go. I wrapped my fingers around the edge of the door and pushed it wider, slowly, making as little noise as possible. I stepped closer and raised my phone higher, scanning behind the stacks of boxes. For a second, I didn't see anything, just shadows. Then something shifted. A small, quick movement. My eyes locked on it. Between 2 tall boxes, someone was crouched down. Pressed into the corner, I saw a sleeve, all dark clothing, and part of an arm. A person. A whole person hiding in our pantry, silent, waiting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just kept the light pointed at that narrow space, watching the shape of them, watching to see if they'd stand up or rush out or speak or anything. The figure stayed completely still, but I knew what I saw, and I knew they were real. I was inches away from the door, phone shaking in my hand, staring at the person hiding there. I jumped back so fast I almost slipped. My whole body reacted before my mind caught up. I slammed the pantry door shut with my forearm, not even looking, just shoving it closed as hard as I could. Then I bolted. I don't remember making the decision to run. My legs were already moving. I grabbed my keys tighter in one hand, phone in the other, and sprinted across the living room toward the front door. I didn't even bother locking it. I just yanked it open and flew out into the hallway. I took the stairs 2, 3 at a time, practically falling down them. The sound of my footsteps echoed so loud I kept thinking he was right behind me. When I burst out onto the sidewalk, I stopped only because my legs started to give out. I bent over, breathing like I'd run a mile. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I dialed 911 immediately. I told the dispatcher everything as fast as I could. There's someone hiding in my apartment. I ran. I'm outside. I don't know who he is. I didn't see his face. I gave the address. She told me to stay where I was, stay on the line, and definitely don't go back inside. I kept staring up at the windows, half expecting to see someone looking back at me. I didn't see anything, but that didn't make me feel any better. 5 minutes later, maybe less, I wasn't keeping track. I noticed movement inside the building. From where I stood, I could see the bottom of the stairwell through the glass door. The apartment door upstairs must have opened, because suddenly a guy came flying down the stairs. He wasn't running like he was confused or scared. He was running with purpose, like he already had his exit planned. He pushed through the lobby door so fast it banged against the wall, then sprinted past me down the sidewalk. I only caught a glimpse. Dark clothes, average height, nothing distinctive. I don't even know if he saw me. A minute or two later, a patrol car pulled up. I waved them down and tried to explain through adrenaline and shaky breathing that the guy had just run off, that way, right around the corner. One officer took off in the direction I pointed. The other told me to stay close and walked with me back inside. We went up the stairs together. I didn't want to go back in there at all, but he kept saying, "Stay behind me," and I did. When he opened the apartment door, he called out to check the rooms, even though he already seemed sure the guy was gone. After a few minutes, he stepped back into the hallway and said, everything looked clear. Inside, the place felt different. Not messy the way I'd found it earlier, more violated. The pantry door was hanging open again. Some boxes had been shifted. You could tell someone had squeezed into that narrow gap. The officer checked the front door frame, then asked about the windows. Everything looked normal until we got to Jason's room. The window was cracked open just a few inches. We never left it like that, especially on the second floor. The officer leaned in and pointed out the old fire escape right next to it. Rusted metal, still solid enough for climbing. He said that was probably how the intruder got in. I called Jason, told him what happened. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out in pieces. He said he was clocking out right then and coming home. The officers took statements while we waited. By the time Jason arrived, the adrenaline had burned off, and I just felt drained. We walked through both rooms with the officers. His laptop was gone. From my room, about $50 I kept in a drawer was missing. That was it, thankfully. The police said they'd file the report and keep an eye out, but with such a vague description, we shouldn't expect much. After they left, me and Jason went around closing windows, checking locks over and over, and we installed a door chain the next morning. For weeks after that, every small sound in that apartment felt like someone moving where they shouldn't be, and I never walked past that pantry without looking twice. I've got this weird thing where I sleep best during rain. Most people complain about the noise, say they can't fall asleep when it's drumming on the roof, but for me it's like white noise. The heavier the downpour, the deeper I sleep. Maybe it started at my grandma's place with the metal roof, where summer storms sounded like someone shaking a giant bucket of nails. She hated those nights, but I'd knock out on her old couch in minutes. Now any decent rain hits, and my brain just flips a switch and shuts down. On dry, quiet nights, I can lie there for hours, staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about money and work and every dumb thing I've ever said. But as soon as it starts raining, I'm gone. By April 2019, I was renting a small house in coastal Louisiana, in a town near the bay that mostly lived off shrimp, tourists, and gossip about storms. I was 32. working maintenance at a marina, single, no kids, no pets. Nobody sharing the place except a dying ficus in the living room. The rent was cheap because the house was old, but it had a wide porch, and I could see the bay if I leaned on the rail. The house sat on a low hill, which in that flat area counted as high ground. Most places around us were pretty much at sea level, maybe a couple feet up on blocks if their owners had money. When I first saw the listing, that little hill was what sold me. Everyone down here either already has a flood story or is just waiting for their turn, and I didn't want mine to start with me renting the lowest house on the street. To my right, down the slope, was a 2-story place with peeling blue shutters where an older couple, the Bensons, spent their retirement watching weather reports. On my left was a 1-story bungalow with a rusty metal roof and a yard always littered with bikes and plastic toys, home to the Rodriguez family and their 3 loud kids. Because their houses sat lower on the hill, they watched the water levels a lot closer than I did. Even on regular summer storms, I'd see puddles creeping up their driveways while my steps stayed dry. That week, the local news kept looping the same map with a red swirl in the Gulf, talking about a tropical storm that might, or might not, curve toward us. By Thursday, the might not part quietly disappeared, and the meteorologists started saying things like heavy rainfall, coastal flooding, and wind gusts over 60 miles an hour. Our phones screamed with those emergency alerts about potential dam stress and flash floods in low areas. Out here, you learn not to panic every time they put a red banner on the screen, but you also learn not to ignore it. So that evening, everyone on our little hill started moving with that quiet, practiced urgency you only see in places that get hit a lot. Mr. Benson dragged plywood out of his shed and started boarding his downstairs windows while his wife hauled flower pots off the porch. Down the slope, I watched Carlos Rodriguez stack sandbags in front of his door while his kids carried lawn chairs to the truck. I did my version of preparing. I checked the small generator in my shed, made sure it turned over, then filled every empty jug I had with tap water. I set out flashlights, batteries, and a pile of canned food on the kitchen table. More out of habit than fear, I thought briefly about driving inland to my brother's place. But the hill, the solid frame of the house, and the generator in the shed all argued that staying made sense. By 10 that night, the rain started, a steady patter, and I walked room to room watching the trees outside. Around midnight, it was a roar on the roof, wind shoving at the walls until I killed the lights, set phone by the bed, and lay down. The sound of rain was so powerful, I blacked out almost immediately. I woke up at 9 with bright sun in my face and this heavy feeling that I'd slept through something important. For a minute, I just lay there, confused, because the last thing I remembered was rain pounding the roof so hard it shook the bed. Now it was silent. No rain, no wind, no thunder, just stillness. I sat up, reached for my phone on the nightstand, saw the screen was dead, plugged it in, and went to the window to pull the curtain back. From where I stood, everything close to the house looked normal. The porch was dry, the steps were clear, the trash cans were in their usual spot. For a second, I really thought the storm had just moved on. Then I looked down the hill at the Bensons' blue cottage, and my brain stalled. Their whole yard and driveway were gone. Brown water sat up against their second-floor windows. The entire first floor was under. To the right, the Rodriguez bungalow was almost completely submerged. Just a crooked roof showing the whole lower part of the hill had turned into one wide, muddy lake, full of fences, broken furniture, tree limbs, and a car on its side near the turn. For a moment, I honestly thought I had to still be dreaming. That was the only way any of it made sense. I pressed my hand against the glass like touching it would change what I was seeing, but the water and the junk floating in it kept moving the same slow way. No sirens, no shouting, just bright sun on my side of the hill and destruction right below it. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like the only sound in the room. I backed away from the window, went straight to the front door, and stepped out onto the porch to see how close the water really was. Outside, it was worse. The water had climbed right up to the base of my hill and stopped there, leaving a strip of dry grass between my porch steps and the edge. If this house had been built just a little lower, or if I'd rented any other place on that street, I would have been in that same brown water. I stood barefoot on the top step, staring at where the road used to be. A car lay on its side with only the undercarriage showing. Farther out, a refrigerator door drifted slowly and kept knocking against a fence post that didn't have a fence anymore. My phone finally buzzed behind me and snapped me out of it. I went back inside, grabbed it off the charger, and the lock screen lit up with more missed calls and messages than I'd ever seen. My brother, my boss, a couple of local numbers, and a whole stack of emergency alerts. I opened the first alert and saw the time. A little after 2 in the morning, mandatory evacuation for the coastal zone because of a dam breach upstream. Flash flooding expected. Sirens would sound. Proceed to high ground immediately. There were follow-ups about shelters, closed roads, rescue crews. All of that had happened while I was dead asleep, snoring through the one night you were absolutely not supposed to stay home. I listened to a voicemail from my brother, his voice shaking as he told me to get out. Said the dam near town had failed and water was pouring toward the bay. "Call me, please. Just call me so I know you're not underwater," he said. And then the message cut off. A text from Mrs. Benson's number said they were heading to the shelter and had tried to knock, but the wind and rain were too loud, and they couldn't stay. Carlos had sent a short text around 3. "We're getting out now. Hope you already left, man." After that, there was nothing from either of them, just more system alerts and messages from people asking if I was okay. It wasn't until later, when the news started showing aerial photos and local sites posted updates, that I understood the full picture. A dam about 10 kilometers away had failed in the middle of the night and sent a wall of water down into all the low neighborhoods. They'd sounded sirens, driven around with loudspeakers, told everyone to move to higher ground. My neighbors heard, grabbed what they could, and left. Their houses were still standing under that brown water, but everything inside them was basically gone. 2 people in another part of town didn't get out in time. An older man who lived alone, and a woman who tried to drive out and didn't make it. When I read that and realized I'd slept through every siren, every alert, every knock, while water tore through the town and people scrambled to leave, it hit me that my place was dry purely because it happened to sit on that hill, not because I did anything right. I'd always joked that I slept best in a storm. Now, every time rain hits the roof, I remember that night, and how close I came to being one more name on that list, and the joke doesn't feel funny at all. Back in 2020, I was in college in Phoenix, sharing an apartment with 2 roommates. It was one of those cheap off-campus places with thin walls and a leaky shower, but it was close to campus, so we put up with it. One of my roommates was Ryan, whose parents actually had money and owned a ranch about 2 hours outside the city. In August, his parents invited the 3 of us to spend a weekend out there, just to relax before the semester got crazy again. And obviously, we said yes. The weekend itself was normal. His mom cooked huge meals. His dad showed off the property. We messed around with his old rifles and rode the ATVs around the back fields. The only reason I remember the exact time is because of what came after. Sunday evening, while we were sitting around the kitchen, I remembered I had an important meeting with my thesis advisor. First thing Monday, I had already pushed it off once, If I missed it again, I knew he'd bump me to the next semester. Ryan decided to stay another day with his parents. Our other roommate stayed too, and I said I'd just drive back alone that night. Around 9 p.m., I loaded my backpack into my old sedan. Ryan's mom hugged me and told me to text when I got home. I pulled out of their long dirt driveway and turned onto the 2-lane highway that cut straight through the desert. It was fully dark, just the faint glow of the sky and my headlights. I put on a playlist, set the cruise control a little over the limit, and tried to relax. For about half an hour, I didn't see a single other car in either direction. It was just empty road and the white lines slipping under me. Then I noticed headlights appear way back in my rearview mirror. At first, I barely paid attention. Cars appear and disappear all the time. But these ones were closing the distance fast. It was a pickup truck, dark color, coming up behind me much faster than I was going. I stayed in the left lane a second, then did the normal thing and moved over into the right lane so it could pass. I expected it to blow by me and disappear ahead. It didn't. It came right up behind me and stayed there, so close I could hardly see its hood. Just bright lights. I told myself I'd maybe cut the guy off earlier without noticing. I nudged my speed up to 70, then 75, then 80. The truck stayed right on me, like we were tied together. My hands started sweating on the wheel. There was still nothing in front of me and nothing behind us but darkness and desert. After a minute of this, I figured the safest thing was to just pull over and let him go. I flipped on my turn signal, eased off the gas, and coasted onto the shoulder. Instead of passing, the truck slowed too and stopped a few car lengths behind me. That was when it shifted from annoying to wrong. I sat there with my hazards on, watching in the mirror, waiting for someone to get out. Nobody did. The truck just sat there, engine running, lights on me. 30 seconds felt like a long time. After about a minute, my chest felt tight. I thought, screw this, turned off the hazards, pulled back onto the highway, and started driving again. The truck did the exact same thing, pulled out and settled right behind me at the same distance. That was when I stopped pretending this was nothing. I grabbed my phone from the cup holder, hit Ryan's name, and put him on speaker. He answered sounding half asleep, still at the ranch. I cut him off and told him, as fast as I could, that a truck had copied me when I pulled over and was now glued to my bumper on an empty highway. Ryan got serious right away. He said maybe it was some idiot screwing around, but if I felt unsafe I should call the police and, whatever I did, not stop again. I said I'd try gunning it first. I dropped the call, tightened both hands on the wheel, and pressed the gas as far as I felt comfortable. My old sedan whined but climbed up. 85, 90, 95. The truck had no problem keeping up. It stayed locked behind me, then its high beams snapped on, flooding the inside of my car with white light. The driver started hitting the horn in sharp bursts. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. There were still no other headlights ahead or behind, just flat black desert on both sides. I knew from the signs that the nearest town was still around 40 minutes away. That was when I dialed 911. I kept my eyes on the road while it rang and told the dispatcher as calmly as I could that someone in a pickup was chasing me and wouldn't back off. She asked my direction, the highway number, and what the other vehicle looked like. I said it was a dark pickup and that I couldn't see the plates because the lights were blinding me in the mirror. She said the nearest patrol unit was about 20 miles away, but she'd send it toward me and told me not to stop. Drive to a lit public place if you see one, she said, but do not pull over on the side again. I stayed on the line with her, reading out every mile marker I passed. The truck was still there, sometimes dropping back a little, then rushing up on me again. Then the driver changed tactics. He pulled out toward the right, half onto the shoulder, trying to come up alongside me in the dirt. I felt the rumble strip under my own tires and pushed the gas harder, easing left just enough that he couldn't get completely next to me without going off the road. After a few seconds, he slipped back behind me. I didn't even have time to process that tiny bit of relief before he hit me. The truck slammed into my rear bumper, hard enough that my head snapped forward and the car swerved. I gripped the wheel and fought it, somehow keeping us from spinning out into the desert. In that moment, it was crystal clear. This wasn't some idiot playing games. This was someone trying to wreck me where no one could see. Adrenaline hit so fast my hands went numb on the wheel. I was screaming into the phone to the dispatcher that he was trying to run me off the road. Up ahead, I finally saw a green exit sign with a gas station logo under it, and I locked onto it like it was the only thing that could save me. I told the dispatcher there was a gas station 2 miles ahead and I was going to take that exit because there would be lights and cameras and people. She said that was good, told me again not to stop anywhere dark and that a patrol car was still heading my way. I flipped my turn signal on early, partly to warn him, partly hoping maybe he'd realize I was about to be around other people and just back off. He didn't. The truck stayed glued to my bumper as the distance to that exit dropped. When the ramp came up, I took it harder than I should have, feeling the car shake as I cut over. The truck followed right with me. No hesitation, I said. "He's still behind me. He's taken the exit too." And the dispatcher told me, "Okay, go straight to the station, park by the entrance, and get inside. Do not go up to the other vehicle." I could see the station now. Small place, a few pumps, bright white lights over a short lot. There were a couple of cars parked near the front. I didn't even touch the pumps. I drove straight across the lot toward the doors. I slammed the brakes late and came to a crooked stop almost right in front of the entrance. I jammed the car into park, grabbed my keys and phone, yanked the door open, and ran. As I crossed the concrete, I glanced back. The pickup had pulled into the lot and stopped near the edge, not pulling into a space, not rolling closer. Just sitting there, engine running, pointed toward the road. I couldn't see the driver, but I felt every hair on my neck stand up like his eyes were on me. Then the automatic doors opened and I stumbled into the store. It was just an older guy at the register and a woman by the coolers. I went straight to the counter, still on the phone with 911, trying to catch my breath. "Call the police. Someone's chasing me. He hit my car," I said, too loud. The cashier stared for half a second, then grabbed the store phone and started dialing without arguing. I stepped over to the front windows so I could keep the truck in sight. It stayed where it was, idling near the edge of the lot, angled a little toward the exit like it was ready to leave fast if it needed to. For a couple minutes, nothing happened. No one got out. No door opened. The woman came to stand next to me and asked, "Is that him?" When I nodded, she swore under her breath and stayed there like she wasn't going to let me stand alone. After what felt like forever, the brake lights on the truck flared. It rolled forward, did this slow circle through part of the lot, like the driver was thinking it over, then headed for the exit. I tensed, sure it was about to swing toward the storefront, but it didn't. It pulled out onto the road, turned, and merged back onto the highway. The taillights shrank, and then were just gone into the dark. I told the dispatcher, and she said to stay put because the officers were almost there. About 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled in, lights on but no sirens. One parked near my sedan, the other closer to the road. The officers got out, talked to the cashier for a second, then waved me outside. My legs felt shaky now that everything was slowing down. One of them, younger, asked if I was Kyle and walked me a few steps away to get my statement. I told him everything. When I first saw the headlights behind me, how he matched my speed, followed when I pulled over, stayed on me, tried to pass on the shoulder, rammed my bumper, then followed me off the highway. They checked the back of my car with flashlights, and there it was, a dent in the bumper and scraped paint where his grill had hit. They took photos, got my info, and asked about the truck. I said dark blue or black, big, maybe a Dodge Ram, but I wasn't sure, and I never saw the plates because of the glare. The older officer said they'd put out a notice and have units watch that stretch of highway for any truck driving like that. But without a plate, there wasn't a lot they could promise. Then he said they could escort me back into the city if I wanted. I didn't even pretend to think about it. I said yes. No way was I going back out there alone. They talked to the cashier and the woman quickly, then set one patrol car in front of me and one behind. I got into my sedan, started it, and pulled out between them. We got back onto the highway like a little bubble. The rest of the drive was quiet. No truck, no one riding my bumper, just the patrol car ahead, the one behind, and darkness on both sides. When we reached the outskirts of Phoenix, the front car turned off, and the one behind me stayed until my exit, flashed its lights once, then drove away. I finished the last few minutes alone, parked outside my apartment, and sat there with my hands still on the wheel, replaying that hit from behind and the way my car had swerved. I never found out who that driver was or what they wanted. Maybe it was road rage, maybe drunk stupidity, maybe someone who gets off on scaring strangers. But ever since that night, I avoid empty highways after dark. When I can, and when I can't, I pay way too much attention to whoever shows up in my rearview mirror. When I was 21 and studying psychology at Arizona State, I got my first job at Subway to pay rent after moving out from a bad roommate situation. I was just glad to be out of that apartment and paying for my own place, even if it meant smelling like bread every night. The store was in the Mesa Riverview Mall food court, and I took the evening shifts from 6 to close because they fit around classes. On my first night, Carlos, my manager, showed me how to run the line and said, kind of casual, "Night shifts get some strange people. Just keep the counter between you and them." I laughed it off. For about 3 weeks, nothing strange happened at all. I learned the build orders, got faster with the knife, started recognizing a couple of regulars. It was quiet most nights. Then one Wednesday near the end of January, she came in. It was a little after 8. The only other customer was a guy in a hoodie with a textbook open in the corner. She looked like she'd taken a wrong turn out of some office downtown. Maybe mid-40s, neat bob, business suit, heels, leather coach bag on her shoulder. She stepped up to the counter, smiled, and ordered a 6-inch turkey on wheat, no onion. She paid with a credit card, signed, and took the sandwich to the table by the window. I noticed she barely unwrapped it. When she left 10 minutes later, she stopped at the counter, smiled at me again, and said, "Thank you, honey. That was really good." I just thought she was a nice customer and went back to restocking. The next night she came back. Same time, same order, same table. Third night, same thing. That's when I really noticed she wasn't eating. 1 bite, maybe 2. Then she'd just sit there with her phone in her hand. Every couple of minutes I'd feel it, look up, and see her eyes on me. Not in a flirty way, not hostile, just watching. By the end of that week, she showed up almost every evening I worked. Carlos caught me glancing over and asked, "You sure that's not your aunt or something?" "She only comes when you're on." I told him I'd never seen her before, which was true, then joked that she reminded me of one of my professors, so maybe that was why she seemed familiar. What I didn't say was that my stomach tightened a little every time I saw her walk in. I didn't want to sound paranoid on my first decent job. The first note showed up about a week later. It was close to closing, lights half turned down, and I was wiping tables. On her usual table, there was a napkin folded into a small square. I picked it up to throw away, felt paper inside, and unfolded it. In small, neat handwriting it said, "You have a pretty smile. I've been watching you for 10 days. We should be closer." My chest did this little jump. I looked around the empty dining area like someone might pop out laughing, but it was just me and the humming coolers. I told myself it was some idiot playing a joke, shoved the napkin into my apron, and finished cleaning. The next night, she came again, like nothing was weird. Same order, same polite smile. After she left, I went to wipe her table and saw a cardboard drink coaster sitting in the middle of the tray. A phone number was written on it in the same handwriting underneath. It said, "Call me. I can help you with school. I know where you live." I read that line twice. There were no hearts, no name, just that my hands went cold. I slid the coaster into my bag instead of the trash. On the way out through the dark mall, I kept checking over my shoulder, suddenly very aware that HR had my address and that she knew my name. The third note was what really shook me. It was Saturday. I hung my jacket on the hook in the tiny back room at the start of my shift, checked my phone, then went out front. Maybe 15 minutes later, I went back to grab chapstick from my pocket. When I slid my hand in, I hit folded paper that hadn't been there before. I pulled out a sheet of printer paper, folded twice, and opened it. "You're ignoring me. That's rude. I waited outside your place last night." My hands started shaking so bad, I dropped both the note and my jacket. There was no public way into that room. Whoever wrote it had walked behind the counter and down the little hallway, close enough to reach into my stuff. Carlos was on vacation that week, so it was just me and Michael, the 16-year-old trainee, on that shift. I picked up the note and walked it out to the line. I set it next to the cutting board and said, "Can you read this?" He frowned, read it, and said, That's creepy. You should call the police, seriously." I knew he was right, but I could already hear the questions. How long had this been happening? Why hadn't I said anything? Had she actually done something? I didn't want to be the crazy student worker overreacting to just notes. I told him I'd show Carlos when he got back and stuffed the paper into my bag. She came in at 10:30 that night, half an hour before closing. The food court was almost empty. Michael asked if he could run to the restroom before we started breaking down the line, and I told him, "Yeah, go ahead." While he was gone, she walked up to the counter like any other customer. Same hair, same calm smile. She ordered her turkey on wheat, no onion. I made the sandwich as fast as I could with that buzzing feeling in my chest, rang her up, and waited for her to move to a table. She didn't. She stayed where she was, resting both hands on the glass over the pans, eyes on my face like we were in the middle of some conversation I hadn't agreed to. Then she tilted her head a little, and in this soft, almost affectionate voice, asked, "Why aren't you answering my letters?" I froze for a second when she asked that. Then I heard my own voice come out flatter than I meant. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and that if she was the one leaving those notes, she needed to stop and she needed to go. She didn't move. Instead, she leaned in closer over the glass, like we were sharing some secret, and said, "I've been watching you for 2 months. I know your schedule. I know you live on Oak Street. I know you get coffee at the Circle K every morning." She listed those details calmly, like she was reading off a list. Her eyes didn't match her smile at all. There was nothing in them. I took a step back toward the little door that led to the back room and called out for Michael, louder than I meant to. He didn't answer. I could hear the hand dryer going in the restroom down the hall, so I knew he really couldn't hear me. The woman kept her hands on the glass and tilted her head, still watching me, and I realized she had gotten all of that information by just following me for weeks. Before I could decide whether to hit the panic button under the counter, a chair scraped behind her. A guy who'd been sitting by the window stood up. I recognized him as soon as he took off his Arizona Diamondbacks cap. He was one of our regulars, came in for black coffee and a breakfast sandwich on the mornings I worked weekends. I knew he used to be a cop because he always joked about how he'd seen worse coffee in the force. He walked over slowly, pulled his phone out, and held it up so she could see the camera pointed at her. Then, loud enough to carry, he said, "Ma'am, I'm recording this, and I'm calling mall security right now. If you don't walk out of here, I'm going to keep you here until they show up." She looked at him, then at me. For a second, I thought she was going to start yelling or reach across the counter at me, but she just dropped her hands, turned, and walked straight out of the food court without another word. He stayed where he was, still filming, until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did he lower his phone and look back at me. My hands were still shaking on the counter. Mall security showed up about 5 minutes later, 2 guys in uniforms. They checked the nearby hallways and the parking lot cameras, but she was already gone. The retired cop introduced himself as Robert Kane after that. He gave the guards a quick rundown of what he'd heard, then turned to me and said he'd hang around until we closed, just in case she came back. I didn't argue. Michael came out of the restroom confused and wide-eyed when he realized what he'd missed, and he stayed up front while I did the bare minimum closing stuff. Every time someone walked past the storefront, all 3 of us looked up. When we finally locked the doors, Robert walked with me all the way to my car, scanning the lot like it was second nature, then waited until I pulled out. The next day, after my morning class, I went down to the police station and filed a report. I brought the notes and the phone number, gave a full description of her, and told them about the car I thought she might be driving from the times I'd seen her leaving the lot. The detective who took the report listened, took copies of everything, and told me this sounded like a textbook erotomania case, where someone convinces themselves there's a relationship that doesn't exist. Hearing an actual term for it didn't make me feel better. It just made it feel more real. A few days later, he called me back. They'd pulled footage from the mall and from one of the exterior cameras. They had a name, Deborah Lynch, 52, an accountant, divorced, no kids on record. He said she'd had previous contact with mental health services for bipolar disorder. They served her with a restraining order that barred her from coming near me, my work, or my apartment. There wasn't going to be any criminal charge unless she violated it. I understood the logic, but I still felt sick when I hung up. I lasted 1 more week at Subway. Even with Carlos back, even with everyone knowing to watch for her, I couldn't calm down. Every time a woman in a blazer walked in, my body reacted before my brain did. I'd feel my shoulders tense and my mouth go dry until I saw it wasn't her. Twice I had to go in the back and pretend I was checking inventory just to breathe. Finally, I told Carlos I appreciated the chance, but I needed to quit. He didn't push back. He'd seen the notes. Deborah never came back to the store as far as I know. I moved on to a campus job a month later, somewhere with more people around and security close by. Robert ended up coming in on my last day to grab coffee, and I thanked him again in person. After I settled into the new job and the panic wasn't so sharp, I wrote him a short thank you letter and mailed it to the address he'd given me on a scrap of receipt paper, just to make sure he knew how much what he did mattered to me. Even now, years later, I catch myself scanning faces in coffee shops and grocery lines without thinking, checking hands for that same neat manicure, checking eyes for that flat look she had. Studying psychology, I'd been taught to feel empathy for people with serious mental illness, and I still do. But that doesn't erase what it feels like to realize someone has quietly built their own version of you in their head and then stepped into your real life expecting you to play along. I lock my doors. I pay attention to routines, and I tell people sooner when something feels off. Because what scared me most about Deborah wasn't that she was sick. it was how easy it had been for her to watch me while I pretended nothing was wrong. I was 22 when my gym acquaintance Martin, who I'd met just a month earlier, invited me for a weekend at a country house outside the city. Back then, I'd only been living there a few months, didn't know anyone besides coworkers and a couple guys from the gym, and most weekends I just sat in my small rented room scrolling on my phone. He was about 10 years older, always talking between sets about clients, deals, and getting out of town with the guys. He said he worked in real estate, that he and 2 friends from business school rented the place together, and they'd be there that weekend anyway, so I should come hang out and maybe talk business. For me, it sounded like a free mini trip and a chance to finally meet some new people, so I agreed right away. Saturday, I grabbed my backpack and took a rideshare to the address he sent. As we left the apartment blocks, the roads narrowed into little streets with identical fences and small summer houses. I kept picturing a busy terrace, smoke from the grill, people already laughing. Instead, the car stopped at a quiet gate where Martin stood alone, hands in his pockets. He smiled, paid the driver before I could, clapped my shoulder and said I was right on time. The house looked modern and expensive. 2 floors, big terrace, pool in the yard. Inside it was clean to the point of feeling empty. Martin dropped my bag by the stairs, said we should hit the pool while the weather was good. And when I asked about his friends, he just said they were still in the city and would arrive closer to evening. We spent the next few hours outside by the pool. Martin turned on a speaker, opened beers and snacks, and kept steering the talk back to money, rental yields, some development they were trying to get in on, how I could start with a small buy-in and scale up fast. For a while I was into it. I was making entry-level pay, and the way he talked made it sound like I'd been stupid not to start investing already. But the longer we stayed there, the more the emptiness of the place started bothering me. For a house 3 guys supposedly shared, there were no photos, no extra shoes, no spare towels, no random junk left lying around. The only clothes I saw in the hallway were his. When I opened the fridge to grab another beer, it held exactly enough food and drinks for one evening and nothing else. I tried to write it off as them being neat, but it didn't match how he'd talked about years of weekends out there. While we ate, I asked how long they'd been renting the house. He said, "Couple of years now." But when I pushed for stories about stupid things his friends had done out there, he only gave vague laughs and changed the subject. No names, no actual memories. As the sun started going down and the air got colder, he suggested we head inside, shower, and then start the grill. I went upstairs first, looking for where I'd be sleeping. There was only one bedroom that looked lived in, one made bed, a nightstand, a wardrobe with his clothes. The other rooms were either completely bare or stacked with boxes and construction materials. Standing in the hallway, I called down and asked as casually as I could, "So which room is mine? Where do your friends usually sleep?" He came upstairs with a towel around his neck, glanced into the bare rooms like they were exactly how they should be, and said in this even voice that the guys had changed plans last minute, that they'd texted earlier to say they weren't coming. He added that it wasn't a problem, we would still grill, maybe watch a movie and talk properly about the project. But something in how relaxed he sounded finally set off alarm bells for me. We'd been there hours, his phone never rang, so I asked to see the texts. Martin refused, calling it personal correspondence. Then I directly asked him if those friends even existed. I didn't try to soften it. I just said, "Do they even exist, Martin?" For the first time that whole day, he shut up. His face went blank, like he was frozen mid-sentence, and he just stared at me for a couple seconds. Then it was like he flicked a switch. He smiled, relaxed his shoulders and said, "Well, Okay, I'll admit it. There were no friends. I just wanted to spend the weekend alone with you, get to know you better. Nothing wrong with that, right? He said it casual, like he just confessed to buying the wrong snacks. Everything inside me tightened. That was the moment I actually understood what bothered me all day. I wasn't just with some talkative gym guy. I was with someone who had lied in detail to get me alone an hour outside the city, in a house set up for one person. No one knew the address, nobody was expecting me back at a specific time, and we'd already had beers. I forced myself to sound normal and said I'd just remembered something important back in the city, that I had to leave right away, that I'd completely messed up my plans. While I was talking, I took my car keys out of my pocket so he could see them, and I stepped past him toward the stairs. He moved fast and grabbed my forearm. Not super hard, but firm enough that I had to stop. "Come on, man. Don't be like that," he said. He started explaining he hadn't meant anything weird, that he only lied because he thought I'd say no to just a guy's weekend, that it was a harmless way to make sure I came. He kept pointing out the food, the drinks, the pool, saying it would be stupid to leave before dinner. While he talked, all I could think about was that we were upstairs, away from the front door, in a mostly empty house that clearly wasn't used by three guys. I pulled my arm out of his grip and told him straight that I didn't like being lied to. I said if he just invited me honestly, maybe I would have come anyway, but tricking me to get me out there wasn't okay. I added that maybe we could grab a coffee in the city sometime, but I wasn't staying the night. I kept my tone low and steady on purpose because I did not want to push him into getting aggressive. When I tried to walk around him again, he shifted and blocked me, still filling the hallway. He suggested we at least eat first, and said he'd drive me back himself after that part hit me wrong. I'd already said I had my car. There was no good reason for him to be the one driving unless he wanted control over when we left. I told him again I had to go now and that I wasn't hungry. This time I dropped the polite act. No smile, no jokes, just, "I'm leaving." I think he saw I wasn't backing down, because after a second he stepped aside and let me pass. I went downstairs quickly, trying not to look like I was running. My bag was still by the stairs where I dropped it when I first came in. For a moment I started to bend down to grab it. Then I pictured realizing something important was still upstairs, and having to go back into that bedroom with him standing in the doorway. I straightened up, left the bag where it was, and walked straight to the door. I opened it without asking. He followed me and kept talking about how I was overreacting, that I'd laugh about this later, that he just wanted a chill weekend. But he didn't touch me again. Outside, I hit the unlock button, heard my car beep near the fence, and headed straight for it. Without turning around, I told him lying to get someone alone wasn't a small thing and that I didn't want to see him again. He said I was being dramatic and that I'd regret burning bridges, but his voice sounded smaller, more annoyed than confident. I got into my car, locked the doors out of habit, started the engine, and drove away while he was still standing in the open gate. On the drive back, my brain kept looping through the day in little pieces. How he never actually used his friends' names, how the house only had one real bedroom, how we'd stayed outside almost the whole time, how his smile slipped that second before he admitted the lie. I kept thinking about how easily I'd said yes to a weekend with a guy I barely knew just because I was lonely in a new city and wanted more friends, and I didn't like what that said about me. I changed gyms the next week, blocked his number, and never saw him again. But sometimes I think about that house and that made bed and wonder if it was just a one-time stupid plan, or if he'd tried it with other younger guys too. The part that sticks with me most isn't even the house itself. It's his face right after I asked if the friends existed. That tiny pause before he smiled and admitted there were never any other guests. And the realization that he'd carefully lied from the beginning to get me isolated like that. When I was 31, I bought a 2-story house with a finished basement that had a separate entrance. The basement was basically a small studio. 1 room, kitchenette along the wall, separate bathroom, its own door on the side of the house. My plan was to rent it out and let the extra money soften the mortgage. Nothing more complicated than that. I took some photos on my phone, wrote a short ad, and posted it on a couple of rental sites. About a week later, a guy named Brian messaged me, 27, said he worked from home as a programmer, needed a quiet place with good internet. We set up a viewing. In person, he was soft-spoken, normal-looking, the kind of guy you wouldn't notice in a coffee shop. He asked basic questions about utilities and noise, and whether he could put up a monitor arm on the wall. His previous landlord picked up the phone on the first try and said he paid on time and kept to himself. That was pretty much all I was looking for. I signed a 6-month lease, gave him the keys to the side door, and felt like I'd done something smart for once. The first month was exactly what I'd hoped for. I almost never saw him. He used his own entrance, I used mine. Sometimes we'd cross paths on the side path and exchange a quick, "Hey, how's it going?" And that was it. No late night music, no extra cars, no complaints from neighbors. Rent hit my account when it was supposed to. I remember telling a friend I'd gotten lucky with my first tenant, and that being a landlord might actually be easy. Then, sometime early in the second month, I started waking up at night. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor, and a couple times a week I'd jerk awake around 2 or 3 in the morning with this sense that someone was walking around on the floor below me. I'd lie there and hear this slow, spaced-out creaking, like footsteps on the 1st floor hallway. The house isn't new, so at first I told myself it was just wood shifting as the temperature dropped. That explanation worked for a while. One night, though, I woke up and clearly heard a door open. You can tell the difference between a random creak and a latch going. This sounded like the door at the end of my 1st floor hallway, the one that leads down to the basement. From my side, it has a simple slide bolt that I always keep locked. There's no reason for it to be open, ever. I lay there listening, trying to decide if I'd dreamed it, then finally got up. I went downstairs as quietly as I could. The house was dark, the bolt on the basement door sitting exactly where I'd left it. I put my hand on it anyway, like maybe it would feel different if it had been moved. It didn't. Nothing else seemed out of place. After a minute of standing there feeling stupid, I went back to bed and forced myself to believe it was just in my head. About a week later, same thing. I woke up from a dead sleep, feeling like someone was moving around on the 1st floor. This time I heard a faint sound from the kitchen, like a cabinet or the fridge door. I went downstairs. The light over the kitchen counter was on. I'm obsessive about turning lights off before bed, so that stopped me in the doorway. I checked the stove, checked the front door lock, checked the basement bolt again. Everything looked normal except for that light. I turned it off and went back upstairs, but now it wasn't just old house noises anymore. Something was off, and it stayed in my head all morning. Later that day, I went down to Brian's door and knocked. He opened after a few seconds, hair messed up, clearly half asleep. I asked if he'd been upstairs in the main part of the house at night for any reason. I tried to keep my voice casual, like I was just checking a weird thing off a list. He looked genuinely confused and said, "No, man, why would I? I've got my own entrance." He said he didn't even know where the interior stairs came up and that he wasn't trying to bother me. I believed him enough that I didn't push it, but not enough to drop it. On the way back up, I had this thought that maybe I was the one walking around, like maybe I was sleepwalking. I'd never done that in my life, but it was the only idea that fit without accusing my tenant of lying. Either way, I needed to know instead of guessing. That afternoon, I bought a small motion-activated camera at an electronics store. Nothing high-end, just something that recorded to a memory card when it saw movement. I mounted it in the first floor hallway, high enough that you'd have to really look to notice it, pointed straight at the basement door. I walked past it a couple times to make sure the indicator light blinked and the little test clips played back on my laptop. Then I left it alone. I let it run for 2 nights. On the 3rd day, I popped out the card, sat at my dining table, and started going through the clips. Most of it was boring. Me walking by, me turning off lights, me heading upstairs. Then I got to the first night around 3 in the morning. At 3:17, the clip started. The basement door handle moved. The slide bolt had to already be open somehow, because I saw the door ease inward like somebody was opening it slowly on purpose. Brian stepped out in a t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot. He didn't look drunk or confused. He just walked quietly down the hallway toward the kitchen, out of frame. The timestamp ticked by. About 5 minutes later, he reappeared, walking back. He stopped in the middle of the hallway, turned his head, and stared up toward the staircase that leads to my bedroom. He just stood there, looking up, not moving, for almost a full minute. Then he turned, went back through the basement doorway, and pulled the door closed behind him. I just sat there staring at my laptop, replaying that clip over and over, trying to make sense of how he was even getting through that door. The bolt was on my side. There was no way for him to open it from below. At least that's what I'd always thought. The more I watched him step out like he'd done it 100 times, the more my stomach dropped. At some point, I realized I was checking the time in the corner of the screen and doing the math against when I'd been asleep upstairs, completely out. The next day, when I saw him leave through the side entrance with his backpack, I waited a few minutes, then took my spare key and went down into the basement studio. I told myself I was just inspecting my own property, which was true, but really I was looking for proof I wasn't losing it. From inside, I went straight to the door that led up into my hallway. I checked the frame, the handle, the lock. That's when I saw it. A small, clean hole drilled straight through the wood, right about where the bolt sat on my side. You could definitely slide a piece of stiff wire through and push the bolt back. Seeing that hole hit me harder than the video. It meant this wasn't some one-time impulse thing he'd planned it. He'd stood there with a drill and decided he needed a way into the main house without me knowing. I took a couple pictures of the hole, then went back upstairs, printed 4 still frames from the camera showing him in the hallway, and loaded the clip onto my phone. I didn't want there to be any argument about what I'd seen. That evening, I watched for his car to come back when it did, and I heard his door downstairs close. I went right down and knocked. He opened after a second, same normal face, and started to say, "Hey, what's up?" But I just held out the printed photos and told him to look. He stared at them, then at my phone when I hit play on the video. I told him I was terminating the lease and he had a week to move out. At first, he tried to deny it. He said it must be some sort of glitch, that it wasn't clear it was him, even though his face was right there. I didn't argue. I just said, "Come here," and walked him to the inside of the basement door and pointed at the hole. I asked him how that got there. He went quiet for a few seconds, then looked right at me and said, in this flat voice, that he liked walking around the house when I was sleeping, that it relaxed him. No apology, no embarrassment. Just that. Hearing him say it out loud made my skin crawl. I told him I'd changed my mind and that I wasn't giving him a week. I was giving him 3 days, and if he wasn't gone by then, I'd call the police and hand over the recordings. He didn't argue with that. He just nodded once, said nothing, and closed the door in my face. After that, I barely slept. I installed 2 more cameras covering the back of the house and the inside of the living room, double-checked every window, and dragged a heavy cabinet in front of the basement door upstairs, so it couldn't open even if the bolt somehow got moved again. He was gone in 2 days. I watched from the upstairs window while he loaded his stuff into a ride share and left. Once I was sure he wasn't coming back, I went down to check the studio. He'd actually cleaned it decently well. Trash gone, dishes washed, no obvious damage except for that hole in the door. For a minute I thought maybe I'd overreacted, that maybe it was just some weird boundary issue. Then I saw the notebook. It was wedged in the corner on the floor behind a small cabinet he'd left. Plain cover, no name. I opened it and started flipping through. Every page was filled with dates and times and short notes, running in order. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. Then it clicked. It was a log A record of his nights in my house. The date started about a week after he'd moved in and went up through the last few nights, so he'd been doing this for almost 2 months. The entries were simple but specific. Stuff like 2:41 a.m., upstairs, he's on his back, light snoring, or 3:10 a.m. He got up to use bathroom, flushed twice, or 1:58 a.m. Pacing in living room, talking on phone, sounded irritated. There were dozens of them. He'd written what room I was in, how long I stayed there, how I was lying in bed, even notes about the way I breathed. I stood there in that little basement room reading about myself like I was some animal he was tracking. As soon as I could move again, I took the notebook and went upstairs. I changed every lock on every door that day. I had a contractor come in later and seal the door between the floors completely, framing it in and covering it like it had never been there, and I filled that drilled hole with wood filler and metal so nothing could ever go through it again. I never rented the basement out after that. I didn't call the police either. I thought about it, but the idea of dragging it out in reports and maybe seeing him again in some office made my chest tighten. I just wanted him gone and the whole thing finished. Even if that meant I had to live with the fact that for weeks, somebody was calmly walking around my house at night, watching me sleep, and I had no idea. I needed a temporary place to stay for about 3 months because of a work assignment in another city. The company wasn't paying for housing, just a travel allowance, so a hotel for that long would have burned through most of my paycheck. I spent a couple of evenings after work scrolling through short-term rentals on different listing sites, comparing prices, trying not to get overwhelmed by all the scams and weird posts. Most of the decent-looking places were either already taken or way out of my budget. Then I saw this one-bedroom apartment that stood out month-to-month lease, fully furnished, and the rent was noticeably lower than everything else in that area. The listing itself was bare bones. Maybe 3 sentences about square footage and all basic furniture included. 2 photos only. One of a cramped-looking living room with a couch and a small table, and one of a narrow kitchen. No photos of the bedroom, no bathroom, nothing outside. Contact section was just a phone number. No name, no email, no agency. That should have made me more cautious than I was. I remember thinking it was a little sketchy, but the photos didn't scream horror movie, and I really needed to lock something in quickly. I dialed the number. A guy picked up on the second ring. His voice sounded rough, like he smoked a pack a day and maybe didn't drink enough water. He introduced himself just as Rick, nothing else. I asked about the apartment, and he said yeah, it was available, he was the owner, and if I wanted to see it, I could come by that evening. He suggested 8. That actually worked for me, so I said sure. He gave me the address. I wrote it down on a sticky note, and we hung up. The whole call took maybe a minute. No small talk, no questions about me. Nothing about a deposit, just come at 8. Around 7:45, I left my hotel and drove over. By 8 on the dot, I was standing in front of an old 4-story apartment building on a quiet side street. The paint on the facade was faded. The entryway buzzer looked ancient. but the area seemed okay. Older buildings, parked cars, no one hanging around outside. The apartment he'd given me was on the 3rd floor. Inside, the stairwell smelled like dust and cleaning chemicals. As I climbed, the wooden steps creaked under my weight. Loud in the empty space, I found the door with the number he'd mentioned and knocked. After a few seconds, it opened just enough for someone to look out, then swung wider. It was the same man from the phone. I could tell from the voice when he said my name. Rick was thin, maybe mid-50s, with patchy stubble and heavy bags under his eyes. He wore a wrinkled plaid shirt and faded jeans. He didn't offer a handshake. He just gave a short nod, stepped aside, and gestured for me to come in. I walked into a narrow hallway. The apartment was dim. Only one weak ceiling light in the corridor was on, and it flickered once as the door shut behind me. I asked, kind of half joking, if we could turn on more lights so I could get a better look at the place. Rick shook his head and said the wiring was old, and he tried not to run too many lights at once, or it overloads the system. He sounded annoyed at the question, like people brought this up a lot. The explanation felt off, but I told myself old buildings are like that and didn't push it. We went into the living room first. It was almost empty. There was a sagging couch that had definitely seen better years and a small wooden table pushed against one wall. No TV, no shelves, no personal stuff. Thick dark curtains were drawn tight across the windows. It felt sealed up, like nobody had opened those curtains in a long time. The air was stale, with that closed-up apartment smell that sticks in the back of your throat. I tried to focus on practical things. Size, layout, where I'd put my suitcase, so I wouldn't obsess over the atmosphere. Rick said he'd show me the kitchen and the bathroom next. We stepped back into the hallway and he led me into the kitchen, which was even smaller than it looked in the picture. Old cabinets with peeling laminate, an older gas stove, a small fridge humming in the corner. But the counters were mostly clear, and there weren't dirty dishes piled up or anything. I asked about the heating, if it was included, how much the utilities usually were. He answered, but in short, clipped sentences, just enough to technically respond, no extra info, no attempt to sell the place. Standing there, I noticed how he barely looked at me. His eyes kept sliding past, like he was thinking about something else. When I paused, waiting for him to say more, he cleared his throat and said the bathroom was at the end of the hallway. He added that he'd go check if the hot water was working properly because sometimes the boiler acts up. That sounded reasonable enough, and I definitely cared about hot water more than the couch, so I nodded and stayed where I was while he walked out. His footsteps moved down the hallway and faded. Then it was quiet. I leaned against the counter and scrolled my phone for a bit, expecting to hear the pipes or the shower run or something. Nothing. After what felt like 3 minutes or so, I realized I hadn't heard a sound since he left the kitchen. No water running, no doors, not even floorboards. "Rick?" I called out, loud enough to carry down the hall. "Everything okay?" No answer. The silence felt heavier somehow, but I figured maybe he just didn't hear me, or he had the water running and missed it. I waited another minute, staring at the doorway, listening. Still nothing. My stomach did this small, tight twist, the kind you get when something is just slightly wrong. I stepped out of the kitchen into the hallway. From there, I could see the bathroom door at the very end. It was closed. The corridor light buzzed faintly overhead. I walked down, my shoes sounding too loud on the worn floor. When I reached the door, I knocked, not super hard, but enough that anyone inside would hear it. "Rick?" I said again, closer this time. "You in there?" No reply. I wrapped my hand around the doorknob and turned it. It stopped almost immediately, locked from the inside. I raised my voice and called his name again, asked what was going on, pressed my ear to the door, and just stood there listening to the complete silence on the other side. I stayed there with my ear on the bathroom door for maybe a minute, just listening. No water, no movement, no cough, nothing at all. The quiet made my skin feel tight. Standing in a stranger's hallway while he hid in a locked bathroom suddenly felt like the dumbest situation to be in, and the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. I decided I was done. I wasn't going to bang on the door or try to play hero. I just wanted to walk out and pretend this place never existed. I turned away from the bathroom and started down the corridor toward the front door. As I passed one of the side rooms, I noticed the door there was cracked open a couple of inches. I was sure it had been closed when we walked past earlier. I slowed without meaning to and glanced at the gap. Something moved inside the dark room. It was just a shift, like someone taking a half step back. I froze and stared. In that narrow slice of space, I could see the outline of a person standing just inside. Broad shoulders, thicker build, definitely not Rick. This person was taller and heavier, and the way they eased backward told me they knew I'd seen them. Whoever it was had been standing there, silent, the whole time. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't say a word. I walked straight to the front door, hand already out, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The handle turned. I stepped into the stairwell, shut the door behind me, and went down the stairs fast, almost running. When I got outside, I made myself keep walking. But when I glanced back up at the windows, one curtain on the third floor was pulled aside, and a bigger figure was standing there. Looking down at me, I walked straight to my car, unlocked it with clumsy hands, and got inside. First thing I did was hit the central lock button. Sitting there, I realized my heart was still pounding like I'd run stairs. I started the engine and pulled away, checking the mirrors way more than normal. Half expecting someone to come out of the building after me, nobody did. But my grip on the wheel stayed tight all the way to the first gas station I saw. I pulled in by the door, went inside, bought a bottle of water and tried to look like a regular tired guy instead of someone who had just backed out of something bad. Back at the hotel, the first thing I did after locking the door was open my laptop. I went into my browser history, clicked on the rental listing, and waited for it to load. Instead of the photos, I got a page not found screen. No description, no contact, nothing. I refreshed it twice, then tried searching the site by the address, by the monthly price, by the name Rick. The listing was gone. I tried a normal search with the address and his name together. I got random results for the city, but nothing about him. Nothing about that apartment. The next day I went through an agency, paid extra, signed real papers and got a plain, normal apartment, which was all I wanted by then. I never found out who the bigger guy was or what they planned. Maybe it was a setup to rob people. Maybe they were hiding something they didn't want a stranger to see. All I know is that the only smart thing I did that night was trust that awful gut feeling and get out before I became part of whatever they had planned.